Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. It is a Godzilla vs. Kong cast because we are talking about the new movie Godzilla vs. Kong and the old movie King Kong vs. Godzilla and some other Godzilla/Kong stuff as it comes up, because why the hell not? We're just going to make a party out of it because we realized, hey, there's a new Godzilla vs. Kong movie. It looks fun. Let's talk about it. And I am excited, Sean. I have watched a lot of Godzilla stuff this week to prepare, and I think we are going to have a good time.
Yeah, I'm very excited. You know, I was very surprised because it was like a couple of days ago you sent me a text message and you're like, hey, because we were thinking about doing the Batman and Robin podcast, and I wasn't looking forward to watching that movie. And then you sent me a text message saying like, hey, we should just do the Godzilla versus Kong. I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do it. But that was not, surprisingly, it was not my idea. I didn't make the suggestion. It was you volunteered to both because you had watched it, and then you volunteered to watch King Kong versus Godzilla and Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, I believe.
I watched both of those. I watched Godzilla Raids again purely because in my stupid brain, I've seen the original Godzilla. King Kong versus Godzilla is the third Godzilla. I haven't seen Godzilla Raids again. So I went 1, 2, 3.
Now you know the epic story of how Godzilla ends up in an iceberg at the beginning of King Kong versus Godzilla.
It was really worth it because, one, Godzilla Raids Again, not a great Godzilla movie. I did have fun with it, though. That's where you meet Anguirus, and he has some great stuff. And he's in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, too, so that all worked out. And then, yes, I watched Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla because, spoilers, there's something to do with Godzilla vs. Kong. But yeah, so I just, like Sean, honestly, what it was is I was sitting down to watch Godzilla vs. Kong on HBO Max, and I thought, this movie's probably going to be very fun. And then I thought, this is probably going to be more fun than Batman and Robin. I have King Kong vs. Godzilla here in this big Criterion set, which we both have. Why don't we just, and then I sent it to you, I'm like, do you want to just do a podcast out of this? And you're like, you're offering to do a Godzilla podcast, you don't even need to ask.
Yes.
So, yeah. Should we do our quick, spoiler-free reactions? What did you think of Godzilla vs. Kong? We'll talk about the movie in depth, but this is the one that's in theaters and on HBO Max and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it really kicks ass. I think if you are someone who you want to watch a movie that's called Godzilla vs. Kong, if you somehow walk away from this movie not satisfied, I don't know what your expectations were going in. Because it is... Yeah, it's a great kaiju fight movie. They do a great job of characterizing both of the monsters, King Kong and Godzilla. It's very well paced. The action's really well done. The effects are fantastic. It is just, I think, exactly what you would want from this kind of movie. There's a couple of I think quibbles I have with some of the human characters. Specifically, there's one group of characters with the Millie Bobby Brown side of the movie I think is rough. But other than that, I think the movie is really good.
Yeah, and if you're going to have a problem, that's where you want the problem to be in a kaiju movie. You never want it to be with the monsters, right?
Yeah.
And so it's great. I agree. It is exactly what it says on the tin. And not exactly, it's actually better than what it says on the tin, because it's even better than just a good Godzilla vs. Kong movie. But it's truth in advertising, right? This is a movie that completely fulfills what you want out of Godzilla fighting King Kong, and then some. And that is just so cool. I watched it on HBO Max. I'm curious how you saw it, Sean.
That's also how I watched it. I toyed with going to a movie theater, but it seemed like kind of a hassle, also because a lot of movie theaters still are not actually open, so I'd have had to have gone slightly out of my way. The ones that are right by my house are currently not open. So
yes.
I'll probably still make the trek to a movie theater to watch this, because it is, I think, worth rewatching if you like this kind of stuff. But yeah. But for the sake of this podcast, I was like, I'm not going to go out of my way, because I would probably not have been able to watch it this week if I had forced myself to stick to a movie theater.
Yeah, and I felt the same way. I mean, you've had 2 shots of the vaccine. I don't know if I've even mentioned it on the podcast. I've had 1 shot of the Pfizer vaccine. So I'm waiting for my second. I would not have been worried from necessarily a health standpoint going. It just seemed like a huge hassle. It's the same thing for me, Sean. The theater near me is closed. I would have had to drive about 20 minutes. This other theater I don't even really like all that much. And then it's all the having to figure out okay, but which seats are open, which seats are closed. Like it's all of that. You have to wear a mask through the whole movie, which is totally like that's fine that is a requirement. I obviously understand, but I wear glasses and I don't want to watch a movie that way. And so for me, it was just very like I bought HBO Max for this month because I got to see the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, which is one of the Oscar nominees, the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, and Godzilla vs. Kong. That was a good use of my $14.99, I will say. I'm not keeping HBO Max, but it was a good use of my $14.99. So, yeah, it was kind of cool to just see a brand new movie that way. Even though it is one that at some point I am going to want to go see. There is an IMAX that's not too far of a drive for me, and I might have to, like, once I've got that second shot, go digest Godzilla v. Kong this way.
Yeah, it is a movie that I like. It is, I mean, it's totally enjoyable. Obviously, like it's great watching it at home, but it is the kind of movie that if you can see it in a movie theater and it's safe, like it would be cooler because they're big monsters and you want to see big monsters on big screens.
Absolutely. Like, if there's anything that held me back from, like, fully enjoying it, it was that. It was just through all the action, I was like, this is great. My TV's very nice. This looks great in 4K. The HDR is nice. But I want them to be as big as the side of a wall, you know? It's a little, like, I just wanted that. Especially because I've seen all the other Legendary monster movies in theaters, and they have all been, like, I think we have, you know, they're varying quality, but, like, all 4 of the ones they've done so far are incredible theater experiences.
Yeah.
More so than, like, most Hollywood movies. Like, most Marvel movies, to be frank, I don't think would be hurt watching at home versus in theaters. But, like, this is a theater thing. So, yeah. And, you know, luckily, I think it'll probably still be playing in theaters in a month because there's nothing else out.
Yeah, you might as well keep it around because it's like, there's not any competition. They'll have the Kimetsu no Yaiba movie in limited release at the end of April, and like that's it. There you go.
Yeah, I don't think Mortal Kombat is going to be giving it that much of a run for its money. No. All right, but we will be talking about all of that later on today. Sean, do you have any stuff to tell us?
Nothing like big. I've just been kind of poking at the same stuff. I've been poking my way through Yakuza 7. That continues to be very good. Playing more Genshin Impact, which continues to be good. And I've been like just kind of catching up on anime type stuff. So I finished Jujutsu Kaisen, which is a great show. If people like that kind of shonen style anime, if you like stuff like One Piece or Naruto or Dragon Ball or My Hero Academia, Kimetsu no Yaiba, anything like that, Jujutsu Kaisen will be right up your alley. It's really good. The animation is phenomenal. The characters are great. Some really great performances. And yeah, it's a very satisfying season. I think it's 24 episodes long. So you get like a good chunk of stuff. And then it has been very successful. So I think they've already said they're going to do a prequel. I don't know if it's a movie or if it's like an OVA, but they're doing a prequel thing. And
I actually read up on this. It's a movie based on the initial, like, that manga started with like a 3-chapter pilot sort of thing that later got rolled into the manga as like a flashback. And that's what the movie is based on.
Interesting. Yeah. So they're doing that. So it's one of those of where you can be, this is always a thing with modern anime that you can never always be confident if you're going to be able to like get a good solid chunk of the actual full story in animated form, because oftentimes you get 1 to 2 seasons of an anime and then it kind of drops off. But this is popular enough that I think they're going to keep on going for a while.
Yes. I started watching Kimetsu no Yaiba. So just so everyone knows, that's Demon Slayer for those who... There was a disagreement on this podcast earlier where Sean, we were doing our 2021 preview, and I had just alphabetized the Kimetsu no Yaiba game under D for Demon Slayer because that is the English title of the game. I still think Sean was like weirdly angry at me about it, but Sean, you are right. The Japanese title is cooler, and why did they call it Demon Slayer in English? That's very lazy.
I'm glad that you've seen the truth.
Yes. But no, I've been watching Kimetsu no Yaiba. I'm 10 episodes in. It's very good. I'm kind of trying to actually slow walk it for myself a little bit because we are planning to do a podcast, I would think maybe in like 2 weeks, on that season ahead of the movie Mugen Train, which is coming to the U.S. at the end of April. So just so you know, if we've got some Kimetsu fans out there, which is likely because I don't know if you've heard, it's very popular.
Yes.
Yes.
It's very popular, or if you haven't watched it yet, like now would be a good time to watch it in the lead up to that movie, and then you get to hear a podcast on it.
Yep, it's on Crunchyroll and it's on Netflix, so you've got 2 choices for you there. I think the dub is only on Netflix, but it's in both of those places. So that's a fun anime. Yeah, so that's awesome. So how far are you in Yakuza 7? I'm curious.
I mean, I'm not that much further. I've been doing a little bit of like sub story, like running around grinding. Like I haven't sat down and put a huge amount of time into the main story stuff. So I think I'm on chapter 6.
Okay.
But yeah, I've just been kind of poking away at it.
I'm getting near the end. I'm loving it. I'm excited to see where it goes, but we'll hold off more on that for later. I have two pieces of stuff to share.
All right.
One is sort of a housekeeping thing, and that is that I'm kind of reconstructing our YouTube channels. So if you follow the show at all on YouTube, you might know that I've had. It is hard to do this show on YouTube because I like to put the audio up there if I can. The problem with YouTube is you can't just like put up audio and like have it be there with like a still image. You have to render a video, and that is very time consuming. Even if it is just a still image, it is very time consuming because our podcasts are long. And so that is something that it has been hard for me to do on a consistent basis. And so the YouTube channel has sort of defaulted to being the Weekly Suit Gundam channel because Weekly Suit Gundam, I do always export as a video because, one, it has a few more video elements. It doesn't have our faces, but it has some fun stuff I do with the theme songs and eye catches and stuff. And then that show just does very well on YouTube. It does much better on YouTube than the normal Weekly Stuff podcast. Like, roughly we get as many listeners on YouTube for Weekly Suit Gundam as we do through podcast apps, and that's not the same for Weekly Stuff. Weekly Stuff does better through podcast apps. So Weekly Suit Gundam has done well there. That's mostly been the channel. So I have rebranded. If you were subscribed to the Weekly Stuff podcast YouTube channel, it is now Weekly Suit Gundam. And that is its channel, and that is its identity, and it will be for Gundam stuff. And we will, have Weekly Suit Gundam episodes up there, obviously, maybe some other things. But that is its main focus, and everything that was sort of Weekly Stuff-centric is or already has come down. I have been working on getting all those videos, taking them down from that channel. I have made a new Weekly Stuff podcast YouTube channel, and they will be going up there. I didn't want to take down the Weekly Suit Gundam videos because they've done well and have comments and all of that. So that is sort of what I'm working on right now. I have run into one roadblock, which is that YouTube this year instituted a 15 videos a day upload limit, which is really stupid, and I don't know why. But that has slowed down the pace of me getting all the stuff that was on there back up. But I am planning to use that more. We will see what happens with it. I am not like advertising it on Twitter or anything yet, just because that channel is still a work in progress. And if you subscribe right now, you're going to get weird like dumps in your subscription feed of like 20 videos. So I'm kind of waiting until I have it settled to like really start promoting it. But that Weekly Suit Gundam channel is there. I would love to get more subscribers on that thing. It's doing well already, but I think it'll probably do better now that it is specifically branded. And yeah, Sean, who would have thought 2 years ago when you're like, you should do this Gundam bonus podcast thing? And I'm like, yeah, we should even split it off and have it be its own episodes. Now it's its own channel. So there you go.
There you go. It's our little baby is grown up, and it's, flying away with its vernier thrusters.
Yes. To go destroy a city.
Yes.
All right. But yeah, so that is the technical thing. And then my fun stuff thing. Sean, I had... So as people know, I own a PC now. I have switched over to Windows for my PC needs. And I do have, I guess you would call it a gaming PC, because it can do all... It's not like the primary thing I use it for, but it is capable of playing video games. And this week, for the first time, I played through an entire Halo campaign using mouse and keyboard.
Wow.
That was wild. I have, just so people know, I have never really played anything mouse and keyboard other than like some tactical style games on my PC, and I've never really played a first-person shooter that way. A little bit back in the day of Portal, maybe, and Left 4 Dead and some of those when I was trying out Steam for the first time. But it's just never something I like really took to. But honestly, it was the laziness of one day. My brother and I were playing Halo, and we were going to try to play through the Halo Reach campaign, and my controller was in the other room, and I didn't want to go get it and pair it to my computer. And I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to try this with mouse and keyboard. That seems like it could be fun. Sean, playing FPSs with mouse and keyboard is really good. I don't know why no one has ever talked about that. It's weird.
Yeah, no, it's weird. Everyone's just always going on about how controllers are so much better for first-person shooters. Anyone who plays with the mouse and keyboard is an idiot. I just remember all the arguments had about why crossplay was bad, because controller players had such a big advantage over mouse and keyboard players.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad that you've finally made the jump into using the. I think there's something way more relaxing about just using a normal controller because you can kind of just lean back and sort of chill. But if you're being serious about it, a mouse and keyboard is definitely the thing to go for.
It is so fun. And like, again, my joke there that you helped me make, Sean, thank you, is that obviously this is not news to anyone. But like Halo is an interesting case where Halo has had kind of a weird relationship with PC over the years. Mm-hmm. Halo 1 came to PC, Halo 2 came to PC in a form no one really liked because it was the Games for Windows Live thing. And then it was nothing for a long time, and now the whole Master Chief Collection is there, and it's really solid. And I don't know if I can ever go back, Sean. Like, it is... And Halo is weird, because Halo is just... Like, not just it is a game for a controller for me, it's like... That is what an Xbox controller is for. Like, when I hold it, like, that is what that whole thing is for. And so it was quite a bit of relearning, but it felt surprisingly just like... And I think it's because even though Halo was never specifically made for PC, Halo is such at its roots a basic first-person shooter. Like, it is not that much more complicated than Doom, honestly, you know? Mm-hmm. That, like, it just takes to mouse and keyboard so naturally. Like, there are obviously first-person shooters that would be much more daunting if this was your first time doing a mouse and keyboard experience with. Like, probably new Doom, because of the speed of it. But, like, Halo is just, like, a great, like, baby's first FPS for mouse and keyboard. So for me, that was nice. But it just, like, it felt natural right away. I was having so much fun. And also, the game is just much easier that way. It's just, like, very much more accurate. I'm doing better. I just, like, Halo Reach has all of those, the jackals. And the jackals are... They're a bitch in Halo Reach because there's just so many of them. But the key to kill a jackal, obviously, is you shoot it under that little hole in its armor, and then you go for the headshot. And, that can be kind of a tough shot on a controller. Mouse and keyboard, that is a very easy shot to make because you just go point, click, click. But I was having so much fun with it, Sean. I had sort of a normal, like, office mouse for my computer. Because I should also say, I went years without using a mouse on my computer at all. Because when I was a Mac user... I don't really think there's much of a reason to use a mouse with a Mac. The trackpad is, like, so built into Mac software that, like, it's almost counterproductive to use a normal mouse, I think. But with PC, that's not the case. So I had, like, my normal little office mouse. But an office mouse only has 1,000 DPI. And so I was starting to notice that. Like, okay, I have to lift this mouse up, like, 3 times to turn around. That's bad. And so I did wind up buying a gaming mouse. Not, like, a super crazy expensive one. This one was, like, $60 from Logitech. But it's a good one that, like, also works for, like, productivity, and it is awesome. I have never even really thought... I've heard about people talking about, like, DPI on mouses and stuff, but actually having one that I can play around with and see all of those differences, it is so much fun. And it's immediately made me want to go back and play a bunch of other FPSs. Like, my brother and I are kind of, like, playing through all the Halo games, but I also I got GZ Doom, which is the really cool Doom engine that you can run all of the original Doom games and all the mods and stuff in on PC, and that is an awesome program, and I've been having fun playing Doom stuff on there. Doom 64 they just added to PC through Game Pass, and I've been playing through that. Anyway, it's very fun. Again, not a revelation that mouse and keyboard is a good way to play first-person shooters in some other games, but I don't know. I really took to it in a way that, like, I have not had that much fun just playing through a Halo game in a long time. And also just adding that to, like, these games run at, like, minimum 160 FPS on my screen, and they just look so much better than they do on Xbox on a TV. It's really cool. It's so much fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. If I can make a recommendation, you should play Half-Life.
I should play Half-Life.
You should play Half-Life. I've been thinking about replaying Half-Life 1 and 2 for a while. Because those are great games. That's like how I learned, like, first-person shooter on a mouse and keyboard was playing through Half-Life 1 in, like, 2005 or something. That was, like, the first time I really kind of got into FPS on PC. And Half-Life 1 and 2 are great games, obviously. So I would recommend if you're into them.
Isn't Black Mesa out as, like, an official release now, too?
Yeah, I would still maybe say just play the original, right? Because it's Black Mesa is like a full remake, and it's interesting, but it's not quite the same as just playing the original. And I think, in my opinion, Half-Life 1 still holds up fantastically. So
I own the original. I own the whole Valve collection because it's they used to do. They probably still do in Steam sales where you pay like $20 and get every game Valve's ever made. So I have all of those. Yeah. For whatever reason, Portal was the one game I know I've played through with like a mouse and keyboard, and is like my preferred way to play that. And then that is honestly probably the best like baby's first FPS because there's no like twitchiness to it. And then yeah, I should try Half-Life. That'd be fun. That Half-Life, like I feel like Half-Life Alyx really brought that whole series back into the news this last year, where like people were talking about it again, and not in a when will we get more Half-Life way.
Yes, not in a like it's the like Half-Life 3 counter of it had been. Yes. I mean, now it's been 14 years since Half-Life 2 Episode 2 came out. So yeah, it had been a long time. And yeah, hopefully. One thing I really hope is, Sony's been talking about they've been releasing little tidbits about PSVR 2 or whatever for the PS5. I guess PSVR for PS5, I think is just what they're calling it. But I really hope that Half-Life Alyx comes out on that, because that is probably the only feasible way I would be able to play that game. And I would very much like to play a new Half-Life game.
Yeah, that'd be cool. What do you think is more likely to come out first? Half-Life 3 in any form, or the next Game of Thrones book?
Half-Life 3. Because Half-Life Alyx. Yeah, I don't, I haven't read any of the Game of Thrones books, but like I always get very amused by seeing the like endless headlines of George R. R. Martin working on other projects, because I feel like it's like every 2 months you get another, and he's executive producing this TV show, or he's like working on, or did work on, I don't know if he's still working on Elden Ring. And so I think that dude's probably like busy doing other stuff, and it's like, my guess is it's probably very hard to write whatever like the book he's trying to write, and it's like, fuck it, you don't need that. Just get like new jobs because you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Game of Thrones books are dead. I think they are deader than a doornail. I think Half-Life 3 is 100 times more likely to come. I think Half-Life 2 Episode 3, like just that specifically, is more likely to come, even because I just don't think, like, George R. R. Martin, it's so funny, Sean, like, we even got the latest version of the update where he writes on his blog, like, this last year was productive. I wrote X number of pages, but I still have hundreds more to go. And he said that like 7 different times, which means that either that book is thousands and thousands of pages long, or he doesn't actually have anything, and he just doesn't want to say it. And I understand why he doesn't want to say it. I think he is just waiting out the clock until he dies or people forget about it. He will die first, sadly.
Yeah.
That is a bummer. All right. Should we talk about some giant monsters?
Yeah, Jonathan, let's talk about some motherfucking kaiju.
All right. So all the material we have to work with, and I will leave it up to you to organize, tell me how we should organize this conversation, Sean. But this week I watched Godzilla v. Kong, and then, like I said, I was going to watch King Kong vs. Godzilla, the 1962 movie. And before that, I watched Godzilla Raids Again because I just needed to fill in I needed to know, what happened between the original Godzilla and him fighting King Kong. The continuity, really important to me. And then because, spoilers from here on out, Mechagodzilla is in Godzilla vs. Kong. I don't think that's really a spoiler because they don't try to hide it at all. But Mechagodzilla is in that, and I'm like, I've never actually seen one of the Mechagodzilla movies, so I watched what is... It wasn't your favorite Godzilla movie ever, because your favorite Godzilla movie ever is the original, but it's one of your favorites, right?
Yes, it is my second or third. I don't think I've ever fully resolved within myself where Shin Godzilla lies in that. Like, my ranking would be, if you want a fun Godzilla movie, the most fun Godzilla movie to me is Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla.
And I would agree based on the ones I've seen. That or the one... The Godzilla, Ghidorah, Mothra, all monsters attack.
Yeah,
GMK.
Giant monsters all out attack. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like that one too. But Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, I decided to watch that, see Mechagodzilla's origins, which are very different than in the new movie, which is fucking hilarious. And so I watched all of that stuff. So we can do things in any order you want, Sean. But how should we talk about the duel of the century, Godzilla, King Kong, fighting it out?
I think let's go back. Let's turn the clock back, Jonathan. Let's go back to the past, because in many ways I'm personally more interested in hearing what you have to say about the old movies, because I think when we talk about Godzilla vs. Kong, I suspect that our feelings about Godzilla vs. Kong are basically identical, other than I picked up on a couple of references that you wouldn't have, and that's it. Whereas I have no idea what your impressions are of those old Godzilla movies, because old kaiju movies are fucking weird.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, it's a very acquired taste. So I'm curious. I'm curious, what were your impressions? So let's just go back. Let's hit them in chronological order. I think makes the most sense. Let's talk about Godzilla Raids Again. So I should say for this, I have not. I mean, I shouldn't say I haven't recently rewatched them, because I did rewatch them like a year ago or whatever, whenever that box set came out from Criterion. But I did not rewatch King Kong versus Godzilla and Mechagodzilla specifically for this podcast, because I've seen those movies like 20 fucking times. So I was like, I'm not gonna, I have other stuff I'm doing right now, so I'm not gonna take the time to rewatch all of those. But I feel like my memory on them is very strong. So
yes,
I want to know what you feel.
Yeah. Okay. So we do not have to talk about Godzilla Raids Again. That was purely for. Okay.
Yes, we do. I want to hear about all the Godzilla movies you watched this week. Okay.
Okay.
This is Godzilla time. I'm here. It's Godzilla time.
I guess I just meant it doesn't have to be as big a topic as the other ones.
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah, because I purely watched it because my nerd brain did not want to go from I've seen the original, and then I was going to jump to 3. I was like, I should watch 2 in between, and then I can say I've done 1, 2, 3, and then I can pick up from there, because I know 4 is Godzilla versus Mothra, which I believe is one everyone loves, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Mothra versus Godzilla, very, very good movie.
Yeah. Okay, so one day I will watch that. Anyway, Godzilla Raids Again, which is the sequel, which is, if you don't know, Godzilla Raids Again is the only other Godzilla in black and white. It's the only other Godzilla in 4:3. It was made a couple months, basically, after the original Godzilla, but with not many of the same collaborators other than the special effects people, because it's a different director, different composer, which honestly, if anything holds Godzilla Raids Again back, Sean, I think it's that they didn't have Akira Ifukube. Mm-hmm. Because that movie I know not every Godzilla movie has Ifukube. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla doesn't, but it has really fun music. The one in Godzilla Raids Again, it's not a good score. It's barely there. It's not interesting. It doesn't really fit. And that really, I feel like there was something lacking in like a lot of the action scenes because of that. But Godzilla Raids Again is an interesting one. It's basically 2 movies stitched together, because the first half is Godzilla fighting Anguirus. But like, there's nothing like in the other versus movies you get where there's like some kind of like real plot scaffolding around that. It's just that Godzilla's out stomping around and Anguirus is out stomping around, and eventually they bump into each other and fight, and then Godzilla kills Anguirus. And then the second half of the movie is, well, fuck, now we got to deal with Godzilla. And it is a movie about 2 guys who like fly like scouting planes, I guess you would call it. And the one side of it I liked is the human characters. It's a bunch of character actors that if you've seen other Toho movies, you will know, including like even Kurosawa movies. So I enjoyed that side of it. The human characters are fine. It's very slow in between the monster battles because they're just killing time basically in that one, I think. And it is like really awkward when you get through the Godzilla Anguirus battle in the middle is really good. It's like they are really going at it. It's really brutal. It is not at all the kind of like fun, silly monster battle you'll get in the later ones. It's like down and dirty and difficult. And it's actually, I think, really well done. That's still obviously Eiji Tsuburaya. It's good stuff. Anguirus is a cool monster. So there you go. And then after that, the movie is so limp because Godzilla, he's not really hurting anything. He's just kind of walking around. They lead him away from the city with flares, and it's fine. And then some guys rob a bank and accidentally blow up an oil rig. Right. And then Godzilla comes back, and then they lead him into the ice, and then they just... And it's hilarious. Like, the final sequence is like 20 solid minutes of them shooting at ice to create an avalanche to bury Godzilla, while Godzilla keeps breathing atomic breath that it can blow up the plane still, but I guess it can't melt ice. That is weird that Godzilla's atomic breath, it can melt planes out of the sky, but it cannot melt ice right in front of him. Not sure how that works, but then he's buried and the movie's over. Not a great Godzilla movie. It is a fun one, and it does make me wish we had more black and white Godzilla movies, because Godzilla does look really cool in black and white. Yeah.
Godzilla Raids Again is one of the more unique movies in the Godzilla oeuvre, if you will, because it is, like, I think it's interesting to look back on, because it is a movie that feels like it exists outside of the legacy of Godzilla, right? That, like, it is this weird, like, sort of almost forgotten sequel to the first movie that, you know, when we talk about King Kong versus Godzilla was made in 1962. So that's 8 years after the original movie aired. And so this was this like really hastily shoved out sequel. The original Godzilla movie came out in like basically late October / early November in 1954. Godzilla Raids Again came out in April of 1955. So it's literally like half of a year or less than half of a year. And the movie was greenlit entirely just because the original Godzilla movie did really well in the box office. So it wasn't a thing where they were like planning on making this sequel or something, because that's not something they ever would have done back then. It is entirely that movie came out. It did very well at the box office. They're like, let's just make a sequel as quickly as possible. As you said, hire a bunch of new people. Basically, everyone other than the special effects team is completely different. And they just shoved out this movie in this really tiny span of time. And it actually did okay at the box office, but it just didn't like carry much momentum. And so then Godzilla was just like, literally on ice for like 7 to 8 years past that point until King Kong versus Godzilla. So I've always found it just this really weird footnote in the history of this franchise where the way that Godzilla is portrayed and like thought about in that movie feels so like not a part of the Godzilla legacy to me. And something that adds to that, I think, is my favorite detail about that movie is that when it came out in the West, it came out as Gigantus the Fire Monster, because they didn't even advertise it as a Godzilla movie, because Godzilla wasn't like a thing, right? Like Godzilla King of the Monsters did well in America, but Godzilla was not sort of like put in like set in stone as a cultural icon yet. So they just changed his name completely. And that is probably like the most atrocious of all of the like English dubs for any of those old Godzilla movies. It's really truly terrible. And was for a long time kind of the only way to even watch that movie. But yeah, it is such a strange, weird footnote. And I love, Jonathan, that you've watched like maybe 6 or 7 Godzilla movies, and one of them is this fucking movie, where there are a lot of people that I think are like pretty big Godzilla fans who have not seen this one, because there's not a great reason to, other than that it's where Anguirus comes from.
It's where Anguirus comes from. I think Godzilla himself, there's some fun little bits of characterization, like it's not without its charms on how like Godzilla is shot, but it does not, it's very stuck between Ishiro Hondo's, like, he's a terrifying monster, like, primal beast, oh my god, in that original movie, and, like, he's going to be, like, really a character in later movies, and him being a character can be fun and silly, and then in later movies it can be kind of scary again, but, like, it's not really committing to either one. And it's really, they're just animals. Like Anguirus, they just straight up say, this is a dinosaur, here's what it's called. They bring out like a dinosaur's children's textbook thing, like a picture book. And because it's Takashi Shimura, who was in the first one. He's playing the same character. He's playing the professor. And he's like, look at this dinosaur picture book. It's an Ankylosaurus, also known as Anguirus. It's very funny. Like, it's not a bad movie, I will say. It's not like you watch it and you go, this is just terrible. I think as a Godzilla movie, it's lacking in quite a few ways, but, it's fine. And Anguirus is cool. And, I was sad to see him die. I was sad to see him get brutalized in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, because, God, poor Anguirus gets fucked up in that movie.
Yeah.
But Anguirus is cool, so.
Yeah, Anguirus is cool. If you like Anguirus, that's good, because he is in a lot of those movies.
I understand he becomes Godzilla's buddy and like his sidekick.
Yeah, basically, yeah. There's a bunch of movies where kind of like after Destroy All Monsters is when they do a little bit more of that. Godzilla and Anguirus are sort of like tag team in it a little bit. I want to say it's Smog Monster is the one where they literally talk to each other, and it's fucking bizarre.
All right. Speaking of fucking bizarre, should we talk about King Kong versus Godzilla?
Yes, the original King Kong versus Godzilla. And this is something where we should just say, like, very specifically, these two movies, the modern one and the old one, do have two distinct titles. So we'll just call them King Kong versus Godzilla is the original one from 1962. When we say Godzilla versus Kong, that is the new one that just came out.
Yes. And King Kong, I actually was fascinated just reading the history of this movie, because it was greenlit and made for a couple different reasons. One was that King Kong had gotten really popular in Japan after the war, as with a bunch of American movies that they like basically didn't see during the war because of when it came out. So King Kong had gotten big. Through a very weird series of events, Toho had gotten the rights to King Kong that, like, I don't think anyone has ever fully understood it, but it's very funny if you want to go read about that. And then Toho was having a big anniversary, And so they were doing a bunch of special movies, including, that's also the year we got Sanjuro from Akira Kurosawa was made for that. And they did another Chushingura, which is the 47 Ronin. Basically, that movie, that is a kabuki play that's made every couple of years in Japan. I mean, today they still do it. Mm-hmm. There are like hundreds of those in Japan. And then they also decided to do King Kong versus Godzilla, and that would be a fun one too. And pro wrestling was big in Japan at the time. And so you throw all of that into a soup, along with Ishiro Honda having like one idea for the movie that was a satire, but like not wanting it to kind of go into the monsters, and then Eiji Tsuburaya, who had a whole career in the middle of this, having his own idea of what to do with the monsters, and you throw all that together, and you have quite the hodgepodge of a movie. I found it's fascinating historically.
Yeah, no, it is like this, bizarre confluence of events. Like, it's one of the reasons why this movie had like really weird, spotty releases past this point, is because like different chunks of the rights are so like distributed in different parts of the world between different studios, which is why if you want to watch this movie in like the best format, it is the only like way really to do that is to get the Criterion version, which comes with all the other movies, because the only other official American releases of this movie have the English dub on it, and that's it. Which is a slightly different edit of the movie. It's not like a drastically different edit. The edits are primarily, there are 2 scenes shot with American actors at the beginning and end of the movie that serve as like a vague framing device that's like this kind of like news broadcast thing where they're talking about King Kong, and that's where at the end of the movie they're like, and this is why King Kong, spoilers, King Kong won, is because he's got a bigger brain. If you see, here's like the size of Godzilla's brain is this small one, and then relative to that, here's this like bigger thing, and that's what King Kong's brain is like. Anyways, that's why that's the movie, and then that's like it. The rest of it is basically the same, outside of obviously having American actors double over the Japanese performances.
It's such a weird rights situation that on the Criterion set, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in a Criterion release. In the normal like sequence of movies, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 15 in that. The one in that sequence is the English Godzilla versus Kong. Or King Kong versus Godzilla, sorry. It's not the new, they didn't put the new movie on. It's the English King Kong versus Godzilla. Every other one in there is the Japanese version. Some of them have alternate English tracks, but that's not the focus. The focus is the Japanese Toho releases, right?
Yeah.
But for that one, it's the English one. And then if you want the Japanese version, it is on the bonus disc, buried in the bonus features at the end. It is still a full-fledged Criterion presentation. It's in HD. It's got a 4.0. It's got the original 4.0 surround from like that era in Japan. Some of the Kurosawa movies have that too. So it's like good presentation. I believe the reason for that might not even be rights. I think it's because Toho doesn't like the version of that movie they have, because King Kong vs. Godzilla, Ishiro Honda cut the negative at some point for a re-release. This is bad. I mean, Japan has always had bad film preservation, but like, this is long before home video, so people did stuff like this. And they just lost a big chunk of the film's negative. So restorations of that movie have always been kind of spotty, and the version that is in that Criterion set is basically a scan of a print with all the surviving material, but there are a couple of scenes that are very clearly up-resed from an old DVD, because all they had was that. I believe that Japan does have a nicer version of that movie now, because newer materials have been found for like a 4K restoration, but that is the version on the Criterion set. So if you watch the Criterion version, there are some shots that will suddenly become very blurry and low res, but overall it's fine, and the audio is actually extremely nice. But yeah, it's that movie has a very weird history.
Yeah, and so the first time I had ever seen the Japanese version of that movie, like the original version, was with that Criterion release. It was weird, because that was, I think, other than like the second half of the Showa era, which I've only seen those movies a couple of times, that was like, for like the movies that I remember watching as a kid that I really loved, that was by far the longest I had gone without like getting my hands on the original Japanese version of the movie. So that was like an interesting experience, getting that whole big box set and be like, fucking finally, I can just like actually own this movie in the version I want, because like I have some affection for the kind of goofy quality of those English dubs, but all those movies are much better with just the original Japanese cuts and the original Japanese audio with the original Japanese performances, because also the Japanese performances are also campy. So it's like if you want the camp, that's not a thing that the English dubs add on to those movies. Like that is a part of what those movies are in the original Japanese as well. So, and I think it like holds up better that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So should I tell you what I thought of the movie now?
Yeah. I'm curious. What are your feelings on King Kong versus Godzilla?
I don't think it's really a good movie. I think it's an interesting one. It is frequently a fun one. I think, honestly, maybe this is heresy, I think the best side of it is the human satire side. The stuff where it is, because if you don't know the plot of the movie, it's very kind of all over the place, but there's sort of like two running plots. One is Godzilla has returned and is making headlines because some very dumb Americans who are portrayed as very dumb in the, at least the original Japanese, have like, you know, gone and like blown up his ice and like he's out now. And so Godzilla's stomping around, and then there is a TV network that is behind in the ratings, I guess because they're not able to show news footage of Godzilla, and so they want something to compete, and they also have a pharmaceutical company sponsor that wants them to like get ahead in the ratings, and they want to satisfy their sponsor. So two of like the junior news anchors or people at their producers, whoever they are, decide to go on a journey to try to find like a new monster, and they have heard of like this ancient beast on this island. It is sort of like a much more tongue-in-cheek, silly version of the original 1930s King Kong. Because it does the full, like, they go to, it's not called Skull Island, but they go to Skull Island, they meet the natives. It's very racist. It's literally all the natives are Japanese people in, like, brownface, which that's also what King Kong is. So they're not doing anything worse than King Kong did, but, you know, there it is. And they meet King Kong and all of that. But the satirical side of that, like, it's all, like, manzai comedy, like, very fast-paced, like, Japanese, like, stand-up kind of stuff. And I find it very funny. The main producer guy at the studio is hilarious. And there's one line in the movie that absolutely killed me, and I think is one of the best just like pieces of satire on the media I've ever seen, which is where the two producers who go to the island, like they are being held at like, you know, spear point by the natives, and they're like being told like, and they eventually like they convince the natives they're not there to hurt them or anything, and the natives are like, okay, you guys can go, but just get off our island. And one of the anchors is like, okay, let's go. And the other anchor's like, hey, what do you mean? We've got to find King Kong. And the other anchor's like, but this is dangerous. They want us to leave. And he's like, this is why our ratings are so low, is people like you. And he's like basically saying you're too much of a coward to get the ratings. And that's the whole movie, is these fucking numbnuts at this TV station trying to get King Kong and get him to, they bring him to the island, or they bring him off the island to Japan and all of that shit. They set him up to fight Kong. Also, they can try to get their ratings. And that is and they never have a come to Jesus moment. They never have the like, we were wrong. It's like to the end of the movie, this is what they're up to, and they're very happy about it. And I think it's very funny, and that side of the movie works very well. The side of the movie about Godzilla, like, Godzilla doesn't really get to do much. Like, it feels like it's missing a scene where Godzilla actually like stomps on some stuff. So just to create some urgency. It's very aimless once they get King Kong, because it's basically just they're both stomping around, and I guess they'll eventually fight. They don't actually fight until the very end of the movie. That is something I did not... Like, the new movie, by the 30-minute mark, they are fighting. In the old movie, it's the 1 hour, 20-minute mark they finally fight. And it is a fun fight, but it is a very silly fight. I do think it's well done, and it's fun to watch. But yeah, not totally my cup of tea, but the, like, satire side of it, which is apparently what Ishiro Honda, like, most wanted to do with the movie... I think actually works very well, surprisingly well.
Yeah, I think probably that's not too different than my feelings on the movie overall. Of yeah, I think it is the main sort of human side of it, and like those performances and that stuff. I think, and especially when you're watching the original Japanese version, that stuff holds up very well. And that's the part of the movie, yeah, that I think I enjoy the most. I like all the stuff of them. Like the build up to them going to the island, them at the island. I think all the stuff, you know, obviously there's the like uncomfortable racial element to it, but like whole sequence of Kong on that island and like the octopus coming up.
I forgot. How did I forget that? That scene's great. The octopus is amazing. Yeah.
All that stuff is so fantastic. We'll talk about the octopus in a second because it's one of my favorite scenes in any of these movies. And I think that's also where I think like the visual quality of the movie is so striking. I just think like that's where you get like that color, which is very vibrant, and like the fucking like those bright red whatever like the fruit is that King Kong like eats, that like they drug him with, basically. The like bright Hawaiian shirts, like this very bright kind of almost like Technicolor, that kind of really tangible kind of color aesthetic to it, that I really loved. I think the end of the movie kind of loses a little bit when it's two dudes in suits on a soundstage, and that stuff. I think the King Kong Godzilla fight is very enjoyable, but it's also, these movies get much better at that as time goes on, and they get more experienced with messing with the monsters fighting side of it. But yeah, I think that whole middle section of the movie of them on the island is some of my favorite stuff in any of these movies. And one of the reasons is the octopus scene, I think, is just incredible. And I know I described it once on the podcast a couple years ago when I got the old Blu-ray release that only has the English dub on it, that I got because this was one of the movies I hadn't owned a physical version of for a long time, and I was like, fuck it, it doesn't have the Japanese version, but I just want to watch this movie again in a good quality, so I'll just get this Blu-ray. And that's where I hadn't watched this movie in such a long time that in my head I remember as a kid being so fascinated with the octopus sequence because of just how like good it looked. But in my head, it was like, oh, I assumed it must have been like a puppet or something, and it was just like a really well done effect. And then rewatching it as an adult, realizing that's just a fucking octopus. Like, they just have a big ass octopus like on a basically on a miniature set. They do some basic compositing and stuff. They have like the octopus kind of grab onto the dude in the King Kong suit, but it's just a straight up octopus. It is like one of the most effective sequences in any of those movies to me in terms of making you feel like there is this like giant creature there, because octopuses are just creepy as fuck and like really weird animals, and they use that so effectively in that sequence.
Oh, 100%. And we have pretty extensive notes on like what Ishiro Honda was like into and wasn't into on these movies, and like the arc of his career. Mm-hmm. And apparently he was not on board with all the like pro wrestling stuff they do with the King Kong fight in the end. Some of that I find very enjoyable, but that was not his. That was more Eiji Tsuburaya. But like that scene feels like him going to town, kind of with the horror chops you see in like his earlier kaiju movies. Mm-hmm. Because it is just, there's something about it that like on one level it is very silly. Like you're not going to like, you can tell it is an octopus on a miniature soundstage kind of thing. And that is very endearing, and I really love that. But also, like, you do kind of lose yourself in it, and because the octopus as an animal is just such a weird creature that looks alien to us as humans, and the way it is shot, and the way it, because this is the first Godzilla movie that uses widescreen in color, and Japanese movies, just as a rule, use widescreen extraordinarily well. I actually learned all about this in some of my recent research. It's basically because companies like Toho invested very heavily in widescreen processes, and they built their theaters to use it, and their directors had to do it because that's what the theaters had. Mm-hmm. And so because of the way that whole system works, directors became very, very good at widescreen. I think Japan of the 60s is the best decade for widescreen in the history of cinema. And so like it's very well done, and that he uses the octopus like across that whole frame, kind of like spreading out very well. And then when it comes into contact with the suit, it's very creepy, and like it feels like Kong is actually like wrangling it, because he is. It's a guy in a suit, but the guy in the suit is, no one's controlling that octopus. They threw it on the dude in the suit. It's like, see what happens. And that you can really feel that sense to it. And I was really worried we were going to watch an octopus snuff film at one point, because it looked like he was going to tear it in half. He did not. Although I think I read that Eiji Tsuburaya did have one of the octopuses for dinner when they filmed that. And that is a fantastic little historical detail. But anyway, so yeah, it's an amazing sequence. It's so bizarre. It's so well done. I think it really straddles the line between like kind of abject horrific and like fun, goofy, Toho Kaiju stuff in a way that I haven't seen all these movies, but in a way I haven't seen in other ones of these. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's just like really phenomenally constructed sequence. Yeah, with just as you said, obviously, like any like adult viewer would recognize like basically what is happening with the special effects of the day. But I think it is a sequence that is so good at kind of melting that away once you get into it.
Well, part of how they do it is that it's the build up and the writing and the directing of that whole scene. Because what it is you have this little boy who you get to know over the course of the whole section with the natives, and he goes to this little hut where they keep all of like the berry juice that they use to make Kong go to sleep. And he is getting a little bit of it for someone else. He's getting it because one of the guys is sick, one of the producers.
Right.
And so he's getting some of it for them. And he's in there, and then his mom realizes, oh no, King Kong's awake. And so his mom comes out to the hut and goes in there with him, and it's like, we've got to go. And then the octopus crawls over the hut. And so there is a clear, like, actual hut that they erected, and then there is the miniature hut. So you can tell you're cutting between them, but it is tied with those humans, and the octopus's first action is smothering those humans to death. And it's just editorially, it's very well done cutting between the big house and then the scale model that they put the octopus on. And so that is the link that allows you to buy into that sequence. The octopus doesn't come out of nowhere. It's put into a sequence that humans are in. That's what makes, I think, the entrance so good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things of with these movies. Like, I always feel like people have, like, a kind of a misconception about the way that the human stuff and the kaiju stuff, like, interacts and intersects. I often feel like when people watch these movies, there's this complaint about, like, oh, the human stuff doesn't matter, the human stuff's not that good, and I'm just watching it for the monsters. But I feel like people have this thing of where when they have that complaint kind of preloaded, they're going in like expecting for some reason this movie to have like this intense, like incredible psychological interiority to the main characters or something, which is not what these movies are going for. Because also movies, with like intense character drama, like Citizen Kane doesn't have to deal with fucking a giant monster showing up and having to do that whole side of it, right? It can just be a movie about the interiority of the character study of the main subject. Like, a giant monster movie doesn't have the luxury of doing that for its main characters because it also has to deal with developing and building up all the side of the monster side of it. So it's not really about like really rich interiority with the main characters. But you can't just have giant monsters on their own because really nobody gives a shit about that. It might make a good like YouTube clip that you'll enjoy, but you're not going to watch a 90-minute movie of it if you don't actually care for the human characters. And I think oftentimes when people make that criticism, I think they're almost like kind of like misrepresenting their own experience with the film, because it's like, no, like the human stuff, if you enjoyed anything about it, the human stuff must have worked for you on a very basic level, which is what it needs to work on. And like that sequence is a good demonstration of it. If you need the context of the perspective of the people around it being affected by it to give it significance and give it meaning. And that's something that when we get to the new movie, I think they do generally very well outside of one group of characters, and that's been true of all of the, I think the modern MonsterVerse movies or whatever. Like the human stuff is not like deeply fascinating, but it's very good at contextualizing and giving you a sort of viewpoint for and a reference for what is happening with the monsters. And I think that side of it, particularly on the island in King Kong vs. Godzilla, is a pretty masterful version of it from one of the old movies.
I agree, and I think I'm excited to talk about that with the new movie Godzilla vs. Kong, because I think for the side of the characters that are with Kong, it's honestly kind of masterfully done for this kind of movie of like, it helps you buy into the reality of this world so well because of the characters you're following and how they've kind of pitched it and all of that. And I think that's true. Like that, I think that octopus sequence is a perfect example, Sean. If the characters were off doing something else, and this octopus just shows up on the beach and fights Kong and no one sees it, it wouldn't matter. Like, for one, you wouldn't maybe even understand the octopus is supposed to be giant. The humans matter to the scale there. Mm-hmm. And when I think about, I've seen many fewer kaiju movies than you, Sean, but when I think about the kaiju movies that, like, what are kaiju scenes that have really left an impact on me, be it fun or be it horrifying, usually humans are somewhere in the equation. Like Shin Gojira, it really matters that people are on the ground watching that happen, you know?
Yeah.
Or just for fun, like I think King Kong vs. Godzilla is a good example to some of the new legendary monster movies. One I think about a lot. I know this is like a not very popular Godzilla movie, but it's one I saw as a kid, so I like it. Godzilla 2000. I like the main group of characters in that who are like on the like Godzilla watch patrol and they're driving around. And that movie has a phenomenal ending where Godzilla wins and then just goes on to continue destroying Tokyo. And I think in the continuity of that movie, Godzilla just destroys all of Japan. And it ends with the characters on a roof looking out being like, well, we're fucked. And that's what makes that final image so great. So yeah, I agree with you there, Sean. I think, you know, obviously some do it better than others, and some, the human side can be a tremendous bore. But if you do it right, and we'll talk about Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla in a minute, because that does it. Mwah.
Yes.
Yes, it can be fun. Or it can be like Godzilla Final Wars, where somehow the trippiest stuff in that movie has nothing to do with giant monsters.
Yes, you can just make a movie. You can just make your like Matrix ripoff, and then have fucking Godzilla. Didn't just cut to Godzilla just like melting fucking a giant spider and all that kind of shit. Because that movie rules.
Yeah, why not? All right. I did want to. Do you want to talk about the final fight in King Kong versus Godzilla really quick? Yeah. It's good. My favorite part of it is the actors in the costumes doing like all of the pro wrestling, like pounding their chests, and like Godzilla's like, "Come at me, bro, come at me," and King Kong being like, "Yeah," and it's that part is very entertaining. A lot of personality comes through them. It's the first time Godzilla is kind of a goof in these movies. But it works for me. You know, I love that they have... This is one of the best pieces of pacing, because the most famous image in that entire movie is King Kong picking up Godzilla by his tail and spinning him around, right?
Yeah.
I knew that was coming. He tries it a couple of times before he does it, though. And that's one of the things I love, is that he tries it, and Godzilla's like, nope, you're not doing that. And then finally, like, King Kong gets another burst of electricity and is able to do it. Because King Kong is electromagnetic in this movie. It's weird.
That's another fun piece of connection we'll talk about with Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, is inexplicably magnetic or electro-powered giant monsters. Yeah.
It's great. And I can't decide if King Kong looks terrible in this movie, or if he looks kind of awesome, but either way, he looks goofy as shit, and I actually think it makes that final fight kind of work even better for what they're going for.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like they characterize the monsters well, as goofy as it is, and yes, it's very pro wrestling in terms of the pacing and the dynamic of, you know, they're trying out like different moves, but there's a good flow and kind of like a narrative that's told in that fight. And there's just a lot of sequences in there I really love. Like, I love King Kong just like falling flat on his fucking face onto a rock and then playing dead. And then even though he's playing dead to like get the jump on Godzilla, it still doesn't work, because Godzilla just like bodies King Kong for the whole first half of that fight, before King Kong gets like juiced up. You have one of my favorite shots that is just an effect shot that I really think they shouldn't have done because it looks so bad, is when it just randomly cuts to two action figures basically of King Kong Godzilla, and it's like a 3-frame shot of Godzilla standing. He's like 45-degree angle, then 90-degree angle, like drop kicking King Kong basically, and all of a sudden it turns into, I don't know if you would, it's fair to call it stop motion, especially with King Kong in the movie, where it's like it's like a blink and you miss it kind of shot, but it is like really bad, but in a way that makes me smile. And I adore the whole sequence of King Kong and Godzilla on opposite sides of the big Japanese castle, and they fucking break it and like destroy it and rip it apart to get at each other. Like, that's just, to me, a very iconic image from that movie. And that's where I think the fight is quite good, is that it has good choreography and building up really memorable moments in sequences. In a way that is also true when we talk about the new one. It also does that quite well. And knowing that you don't want it to just be, and this is something that some of the Showa movies in particular get into later on, of just like the monsters kind of knocking each other down and then Godzilla shooting his fire breath, and that's kind of it. And just doing that 4 or 5 times. There are unique beats that they build into the fight very deliberately that play very well.
I like the geography of it. The entire fight is pushing out towards the coast. And it's a very clear like arc that ends with them, you know, Kong like basically like diving at Godzilla and pushing them both into the water, and then Kong comes out, and I guess we call him the winner. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, obviously, I think everyone's probably seen the 10-minute fight at some point in some kind of clip. Mm-hmm. You've seen the GIFs. It's iconic. But like honestly, it's a good movie. It's extremely obviously, if you have only seen like the new Legendary movies and you watch Godzilla versus Kong and you're all pumped up after that and you're like, I should watch King Kong versus Godzilla, just know it is about as diametrically different as it is possible to be in so many ways. But on its own terms, I think it's slow in places and it's a little kind of stop-start pacing. But I love the satire side of it. The monsters are cool. That last fight is very satisfying. It's a good movie.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Not as good as Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla.
A few movies are, Jonathan.
You are so right about this movie, Sean. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing that confused me. So this is funny. Last night, I'm sitting down to watch this movie, and just to be sure, I texted you, Sean, and I said, is the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla you like the original Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla? Because there are 3 movies that in Japanese are just called Gojira Tai Mechagodzilla.
Yes, and then in America they all gave them different titles. So it's Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 in America is just Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in Japan, because that is the one they made in the 90s, which is confusing because there is a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which is Terror of Mechagodzilla, but Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 has basically nothing to do with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. And then you get Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, which is, as you texted to me, Jonathan, one of the funniest ways to get around just using the same movie title in English. In Japan, it's stylized as Godzilla X Mechagodzilla. But then when they brought it over here, they said, let's make it Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. It
sounds like they're having an argument. It sounds like, one of them, like, their fence is too close to the other person's lawn. And now Godzilla is against Mechagodzilla. It's funny.
They're taking like vague sides on some sort of dispute rather than them trying to murder each other.
But also, when I was looking this one up, I saw some people bad-mouthing it, and even the Criterion essay, the guy who wrote the Criterion essay does not like this one. And I noticed that, and I'm like, I just wanted to be sure, because I remembered, I'm like, is this the one? Because I'm like, I didn't go back and listen to our old Godzilla podcast, because I just didn't have time. But I'm like, I thought this is the one Sean loves. And you are so right, Sean. Mm-hmm. This is such a good... It's goofy as shit, but it knows it. And it is so 70s. It is basically a very cheap version of Moonraker with kaiju in it. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't even help describe it, because Moonraker doesn't have aliens. It's so good. It's so silly. But also, like, the monster stuff is genuinely incredible and fun. And then the human side of it is like a cheap spy movie with a full musical number near the end, and archaeology, and kung fu, and aliens that turn into versions like little King Kongs. It is so weird, and I was so into it, Sean. This is one of the Godzilla movies I've enjoyed most outside of like the serious Godzilla movies.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it is one where, and I just don't understand why there's, like when I got the Criterion version, I was reading the essays, I'm like, what is this dude going on about? Like, this fucking movie rules. Like, how can you like any of these movies outside of like the original one, a couple of the 90s ones, and like Shin Godzilla? Like, the serious Godzilla movies are very, very few and far between. Most of them are more into line with the tone of Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. And it's like, of the movies that go for that cheesy tone in particular, anything that's like, it has the like more ridiculous sci-fi alien stuff, which is a lot of these movies, like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla to me, like by far does it the best. It feels, and I mean, it doesn't just feel this way, it very like literally directly is based on the director's statement. It is like the biggest inspiration for an influence on Godzilla Final War, in the way that it is doing a similar thing of saying, how do we make sure that when we're cutting to the humans that part is entertaining as well? Well, one of the ways you do that is by exaggerating it a lot. And so, the whole human half of the movie is basically its own B-spy sci-fi movie on its own, like regardless of the monster stuff. Obviously, it resolves around the monsters because the aliens are trying to make Mechagodzilla, but you have all this like great like weird spy stuff with these aliens that are disguised as humans, but then when they get killed, they fucking spray green blood and then slowly morph into weird Planet of the Apes looking knockoffs that have very bad makeup. And you have a mad. I guess he's not a mad scientist. He's a good guy, like he's a good character, but he goes around talking about space titanium all the time. He's got his like space titanium pipe and all that shit. Like that side of the movie. Honestly, if you like remade the movie and you'd have to like do some like different stuff, shoot some different scenes to connect everything together and give it like a climax, but you could do just the spy side of the movie and it would still be an entertaining movie. It wouldn't be as good because nothing would be as good if you cut Godzilla out of it, but it would still be entertaining in its own right, in the same way that the weird Matrix knockoff in Godzilla Final War, if you redid the movie to fill in those gaps that the monster stuff occupies, you could make that foundation into its own movie and it would still be very entertaining. And that's very much what Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla does, on top of then having, I think, some of the best fights in any of these movies, particularly from this period. What is, in my opinion, the best score that is not an Ifukube score in any of these movies. Fukuda Jun, who is the composer, he also did a bunch of these movies. Or, sorry, not Fukuda Jun's the director.
He's the director.
Yeah, Masaru Sato, who did a couple of the other movies from the 70s as well. I just think it's an intensely entertaining movie, top to bottom, that 100% knows what it is. And if you go in expecting just to have like a fun, goofy time, this movie will give it to you.
Oh, yeah. Entertaining is exactly the word to use. It's a blast. Like, I sat down to watch this, and, these movies are not my jam to the degree they are your jam, Sean. I don't have that, like, childhood association or any of that stuff. And so I think it just takes a little more for me to be, like, on board with it. I was so on board. I was, like, edge of my seat. Because, one, this movie just gets off to the races. Yeah. Like, I'm sure you will be the first to agree, some Godzilla movies are a little slow to start.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
This one is off to the races. You start with, like, an ancient temple, and there's an archaeologist lady there, and she's taken out the thing, and then there is the singing girl who, like, is the, like, heir to this ancient dynasty in this temple, and then there is her, like, grandfather dude who looks like Tatsuya Nakadai in Ron, which made me laugh very hard, because he's in the same kind of old man makeup. And then she's going around with this, like, journalist dude who's, like, the son of the professor, and all of that. And then Anguirus shows up, and Godzilla shows up, and Godzilla's hurting Anguirus. And I was fully bought in, like, why is Godzilla doing that? I was, like, with the humans, like, Anguirus is his friend. This is wrong. Why would Godzilla do that? And I'm sure you have told me the plot of this movie at some point, Sean, but I had genuinely forgotten the whole side that there are two Godzillas, and one of them is Mechagodzilla and all that. I didn't know where Mechagodzilla was going to show up. And then you get, of course, some of his skin comes off and it's metal, and I'm like, oh. And then you have real Godzilla show up, and real Godzilla has so much personality in this movie. He is he's such a little shit. He's got those great eyes. He's, like, just clearly angry at Mechagodzilla, like, for stealing his shit. He is always roaring. Like, I feel like Godzilla's roar is like 45% of this movie's soundtrack, and it is great because Godzilla's roar will never get old. And that first fight he has with Mechagodzilla is insane. The color, the composition, the, like, nighttime photography, the guys watching off on the side being like, the professor being like, yes, the only explanation is that this is an alien robot made by aliens out of the space titanium, and this is the real Godzilla. And I just love his power of deduction. He's very Sherlock Holmes-esque.
Yeah.
He's if you have eliminated the possible, the impossible is all that remains. So space titanium. And it's a great fight. Mechagodzilla is an iconic design for a reason. He's awesome. He is like every great Power Rangers villain put into one. And I love that whole side of the movie, and then you get a bunch of spy stuff, and then the final fight is great, because you also meet King Caesar, who, I have seen King Caesar before. I think he's in Final Wars.
Yes, yeah, that's the only other movie that he's in.
Okay, so I like knew King Caesar a little bit. I did not know he had a song that goes on. It's like a 5-minute pop song that she sings, and it's just this full-blown music video about King Caesar that gets him to wake up, and then he goes and fights Mechagodzilla with Godzilla, and there's that great scene where, like, Mechagodzilla is, like, turns his body in half so he can shoot both of them. Yeah, this is the closest I think I've ever felt to, like, okay, this is why Sean gets his rocks off to these movies. This is really good.
I mean, that's basically right. Like, this is the one that, like, I watched the most as a kid, by far, because it's just so purely entertaining. It's so evocative, and yeah, like it is. Because it's not entertaining because it's like it's so bad it's good or something. Like it's 100% knows what it's going for and it's executing on it at a very high level. So yeah, like I'm always very struck by when I rewatch this movie that when Godzilla encounters Mechagodzilla at the beginning in this like kind of industrial foundry area that gets exploded, and so everything's on fire at night, and yes, you have all the other characters standing off to the side expositing, but their like faces are lit up by the flames and all that. Like it's a really, really well shot sequence, including then when you get to the end fight, which is more sort of like flatly lit to make it like very clear, especially because you have a lot more going on there with having three monsters. But it is so well choreographed and designed and paced where it starts with King Caesar fighting Mechagodzilla, and then Godzilla shows up, and then this is also one where you have like it is like almost uncomfortably violent as the way that some of the 70s movies are, where I mean that part at the beginning where Mechagodzilla, when he's disguised as normal Godzilla, fights Anguirus and then fucking does the King Kong thing with his mouth and breaks his fucking jaw basically, and Anguirus waddles away with like this very kind of pained version of his yell. And
there's blood everywhere. Yeah. Like I was going to text you, Sean, and I didn't because I realized Anguirus was alive, but I was going to say, was this the equivalent to Japanese children in the 70s of the Transformers movie in the 80s? Just watching Anguirus get brutally murdered? And yet, that doesn't have anything on Godzilla just having blood spurting out of his neck in a geyser at the end of the movie. God, Godzilla is like a bloody mess at the end of this thing.
Yeah, Godzilla's covered in blood, but then he gets up and uses his magnet powers that he has in this movie, and only this movie, to defeat Mechagodzilla. But it fucking totally works, and it has, there's just such a great sense of character and personality to the fights in those beats, right? This I think is like the best version of the professional wrestling style they go for, especially having like a straight on tag team match at the end of the movie. And some of those beats to me are just so memorable. Like you said, the one of Mechagodzilla like turning his body both directions to hit both King Caesar and Godzilla. I always love Godzilla ripping Mechagodzilla's head off, and like how much force that takes, and him like having to like readjust his grip and really get in there and really twist it. Like all that stuff is so, especially watching it as a kid, it stands out to me so much and is so memorable, but it's because they're built around these like really distinct moments where all the sound design and the acting and the music and all of that comes together so perfectly.
It's great. Like you said, the music, the score is great. The cinematography even is like really good in that final fight. They do some like camera moves, especially around that moment when Mechagodzilla like twists in half, where like I just remember there's this move where they clearly like do a quick track from like in on Mechagodzilla like out around the monsters. There's some really good stuff there. The color work is great. And I also think like pace-wise, this is something Godzilla versus Kong, the new one, does too, that to me is like, this is what you need to do with a kaiju movie, is have a big fun fight in the first act for me, and then if you need to do like your plot bullshit, you can do that in the middle, but I'm already bought in because you did the big fight, and then you have another one at the end. And that's how this one is structured, where you have your big first face-off early on, and then a long period mostly without the monsters, and then you can go back to it, and I think like you can really earn the audience like buy-in if you do it that way. This one does it really well. And it's not even that, it's just you've got the Anguirus fight I said earlier too, which is so brutal, but then also like Mechagodzilla in his Godzilla suit is so brutal. Like there's this early scene of him tearing down like an apartment complex that is such a brutal version of that, where like he's like angrily doing it, like fuck this building. Whereas I feel like Godzilla usually is just stomping through because he stomps, and it's great. It's the whole movie. It's so much fun. If people haven't seen this one, and I know this one was like really hard to get a hold of forever, right, Sean?
Yeah, this is the one that, this is the first version I've owned it that was not VHS, was the Criterion version. Because I still don't think there's an independent Blu-ray version of the movie. There's like a DVD that's been out of print since like 2005.
Yeah, everyone should get that Criterion set anyway because it's just one of the best Criterion sets. I know some stupid people like to complain that the packaging is too tall, to which I say, it's Godzilla, it's big. That's the point. It's Godzilla. What do you fucking want? It's Godzilla, so it's really big. That's why it's cool. I love that packaging.
Yes, and you just have these really big, gorgeous, big versions of all the art for all the movies that they commissioned a different artist to do like a big art piece for each of the films. Yeah, I think it's a really, really awesome set.
And other than the Japanese version of King Kong versus Godzilla, the movies look really healthy. Like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla looks really good on Blu-ray. Like not too good. You know, you never want these movies looking too clean, but it looks really good. They sound very good. The mono audio tracks are very good. But yeah, it's I had so much fun. I want to go watch that one again. I had so much fun with it.
Yeah, it's a great movie. And then like one of the other things I love about it is Mechagodzilla as a monster just gives you so much excuse to do cool shit and just have everything explode like it does at the end of that movie, where it's just like there's like 5 million lasers shooting everywhere and missiles and everything's blowing up, and it's fucking great.
There's a part in the fight where he just unloads on Godzilla. I think this is the part where Godzilla starts having a spouting neck blood geyser, where Mechagodzilla is just firing everything in his artillery, and they start doing these crazy, like almost like Eisensteinian quick cuts just all around, like montage editing to all the different ballistics going off, and it's just mind-melting. And then Godzilla's just spurting blood out of an open wound. I assume they had to make a new suit for the next movie because that suit got really bloodied up.
It's a great movie. It's such a great movie.
It's so great. There's so much personality to it. It's a good reminder of like something I think the Legendary movies, we're going to talk about this, have really taken to heart, that like the actor doing the monster really matters. It is not an effect. It is a character. That's something the Legendary movies have done fantastically through all four, I think. And they continue doing it, I think, especially with King Kong and the new one, with Terry Notary doing the mocap. But yeah, it's very well done. So yeah, watch Godzilla. Watch all of these. These are all fun. Maybe not Godzilla Raids Again. You can get around to it if you want. Again, I like the fight with Anguirus in the middle. But yeah, other than that, it's fun movies. I'm glad I watched these, Sean, and I will have to continue like picking my way through the Showa era, because I have this box set. I need to watch the rest of it.
Yes, and then someday I'm going to get you to watch those Gamera movies from the late 90s and early 2000s, that trilogy, which is unbelievably good, so we can do a podcast on it. I don't think there will ever be like an opportunity to have that podcast be relevant to something unless Legendary decides like, well, fuck it, we've done our Godzilla and King Kong, let's buy the rights to Gamera and see if we can do that. But if you want like what is, I think, some of the best kaiju movies with like classic style effects, that trilogy of Gamera movies is what I would point you to.
So which fucking rule? That's not is that the Heisei trilogy?
Yes, it's the Heisei trilogy. So it's Gamera, Guardian of the Universe, Gamera versus Legion, and the Gamera versus Iris, I think is what the
I am seeing there's a new 3-disc limited edition steelbook from Arrow. Because I think Arrow recently did all the Gamera movies, and they've re-released them in sets. Have you seen that, Sean?
Yes. I'm not huge into the Showa era Gamera movies because those are very hit and miss. And those misses are pretty hard to watch. But this trilogy is fucking awesome.
And that's directed by the guy who did the GMK or whatever it's called, right?
Yes. Yeah. Who also did the Death Note movies.
Yes, I really like. Yeah, I will have to watch it. You do not have to convince me to watch those, Sean. I want to watch those. So, yes, that should be fun. Anyway, yeah, I am down to watch more kaiju. I also have, because they were on sale at one point, I have several of the Ultraman sets that they've been doing. The first 3, Ultra Q, Ultraman, and Ultra 7, that I want to watch at some point, because that feels like maybe almost the ideal version for me, of 20-minute bursts of kaiju.
The main guy in King Kong versus Godzilla, the one who's like the handsome leaning man type guy, he's the main actor in Ultra Q.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's obviously the Tsuburaya effects, they're very fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, classic Godzilla is fun. News alert, news flash. But we don't get to talk about it enough, and I know it's something you very much love, Sean. It's, maybe after Weekly Suit Gundam, it becomes Weekly Godzilla Suit.
You can just call it Weekly Suit Godzilla. I think
I like better. Weekly Godzilla Suit because Godzilla is a guy in a suit.
Yeah, and a lot of the movies they make new suits. I mean, that's where the fake Godzilla kind of comes from. Was they had an old raggedy Godzilla suit from the past couple of movies that like, well, we can't use this for a whole other Godzilla movie because, as you saw, Jonathan, they really fucked those suits up. So it's like They don't last much more than a couple of those movies. So let's use this for our fake Godzilla at the beginning. And then
I was
really
going to
fuck
ask
it up.
about that because that felt like an intentional kind of commentary that he's wearing a Godzilla suit, and it even like they make it look much more like a suit, raggedy, like shitty suit than an actual effect, and that's part of the fun of that, I think, when it's all like hanging off of him and stuff.
Yeah, I mean that was just because that suit had been set on fire and submerged. I mean, remember the Godzilla, all these movies end with Godzilla going and swimming away in the quote unquote ocean. That's obviously not the actual ocean. But they get submerged in water multiple times over the course of all of those movies. It's like those suits get fucked up, dude. Like I don't even want to imagine what one of those suits smelled like at the end of making one of those movies, because it must have been just disgusting.
I had never thought of that Godzilla going and swimming away had to be some dude in a suit diving underwater. That's so much funnier when I picture it that way. All right. They don't have to do that anymore, but they still do mocap. Should we transition to talking about the Legendary movie?
Yeah, so let's transition into the fourth movie in the MonsterVerse, which I guess is what it's called. I don't know at
Should
what
we
point.
recap the movies really quick, our thoughts on them? We have full podcasts on Godzilla 2014 and King of the Monsters. We never did one on Kong Skull Island, which is too bad because that is my favorite of these. But let's recap, go back to the beginning. Godzilla 20... I've only ever seen each of these movies once when they were in theaters, but I do like them all, and certainly I think they are the closest Hollywood has ever come to nailing something from Japan.
Yes, that's for sure.
Not close as they've come. They did nail it,
Yes,
frankly,
they did.
on a lot. Yeah. So Godzilla 2014 is the one that I think like splits people. I liked it at the time. I still like it. It is the like if Spielberg did a kaiju movie sort of approach. It is the most different of these four. But I think as a signal of like good faith that they were in this for real, it certainly showed that they were approaching this with a seriousness that you would not have expected from Hollywood.
Yeah, this is the only one of them I've seen twice so far. And I like the Godzilla 2014 quite a bit. I think it's a movie that has a really good first act and a really good third act, and I think a very meandering middle act. And I think it's something that movie would have been improved tremendously if the Mutos didn't suck and were like the most generic Hollywood version of a giant monster ever. And if the main actor was also not incredibly dull, because that's like one of the things you really need for these movies is you need the main actors to be just over the top enough and have that kind of B-movie Bruce Campbell-esque leading man quality of where they're like handsome but not impossibly handsome. It's like this is not Harrison Ford. This is like, there's not quite an everyman, but close to an everyman kind of thing. You need that quality that a lot of those Showa-era movies had really well with the casting, that Toho had this whole, like, host of actors that they'd pull in that were kind of, had that dialed in really well. And I think that's where that movie kind of hurts for me, is that I forget the name of the actor, but it's kick-ass, that actor.
Yeah, it's Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Yeah, he just did not work for me very well as a lead for one of those movies.
Yeah, I think that's something I think they got better at with the other Legendary movies, is figuring out like what kind of American actors work with this and which don't. Because Aaron Taylor Johnson's a good actor.
Yeah.
I agree and disagree, because I do think like that movie is really good at is inspiring like awe and like putting you on the ground and like as an entry into this world. Like, they could not have started with Godzilla King of the Monsters. Like, they needed to get Americans to like buy into this, I think, and I think it does a very good job at that. I agree that, like, honestly, what I would do is what Bryan Cranston suggested, which is Bryan Cranston shouldn't have died in the first act of that movie.
Yeah.
They could have done. Bryan Cranston would be kind of the guy you're describing, like older, but like that's kind of who you're describing. So yeah, I generally agree that I think the first act's great, third act's great. The Godzilla, when he finally shows up and does his thing, Godzilla is fucking cool in that movie.
Yes.
And I've always loved how he kills that last Muto, just breathing down its neck and then pulling off the head. It's very good. There's a reason, though, they never invented new monsters after that, and they have just used licensed monsters from Toho ever since, because Americans, for some reason, cannot design a kaiju. It is impossible for us. We cannot do it. You've all seen Cloverfield. You've seen Godzilla 2014. We're very bad at it.
Yeah, I mean, that's also something to think, like, it's not as big of a detriment to the movie, but I think it's something that Kong Skull Island has as well, where the, like, whatever monster, the thing he fights in that is, like, a similar vague, pasty gray, fleshy, nondescript, if they ever want to make a new kaiju for one of these movies, someone needs to there has to be on a whiteboard, like, underlined a million times, don't make it gray. Pick a fucking color. Like, give it like a distinct color like yellow or red or fucking blue or green or whatever that you can identify it by, but it cannot be gray because it's just boring.
Because when they've adapted Toho's monsters, they've done a great job.
Yes.
But like when they have to come up with their own, they're not good at it, and I don't know why. But yeah, Kong Skull Island. I love Kong Skull Island. I'm sad we didn't do a podcast on this one at the time. I think that one is a fucking fun movie. I love the cast. Tom Hiddleston is great. You've got Brie Larson. You've got John C. Reilly. It's very funny. It's got this like, it's like a Vietnam era B movie, which I love that whole take on it. And Kong himself is such a great character in that movie and in the new one too. And like, what's so fun about it is that we've had so many King Kong movies. We have the original, we have the 70s one, we have the Peter Jackson one. We've done the basic King Kong story a million times, even with other characters that aren't King Kong, you know? Mm-hmm. And like, this is the first American movie that just said, because I think it's important that it's not King Kong Skull Island, it's Kong Skull Island. And like, I think of like Kong and King Kong kind of differently because this Kong has his own personality. He's much taller, obviously. And I think they just do such a good job with that, making Skull Island this like fucking horror fun house. That is the side of it that is so fun. And like, that was the one where you kind of sit up and take notice and like, oh, they're actually going for it. This is like a Japanese style sort of kaiju B movie done with American big effects. And not only that, we're reworking the American King Kong icon to fit this. That's really cool. And I really like that one.
Yeah, I don't think I like it as well as you do, but I like that one quite a bit. Yeah, I think it is really interesting the way that they what they sort of choose to keep about the core like King Kong thing, and then what they choose to modify in order to fit him more naturally into like what we would think of as a kaiju movie rather than, you know, like King Kong is sort of a kaiju movie, but it doesn't have most of like the main tropes you associate with it, and with the genre, and sort of like taking some of those elements and modifying them. Yeah, it's a very fun movie. I think like for me, it's like, I think of all of these movies, I think that's the one that I would like to say it's like probably maybe the most consistently good, but I don't think it has like as high a high as the other three movies do in like their best moments.
That's fair. I would probably agree with that. And maybe I just favor the consistency of it. But like one thing that movie does so well is scale. Like all four of these movies do scale incredibly well. But I remember seeing that one in theaters and being like, just the way they sell the size of King Kong and the fun they have with that is so cool. And it's, yeah, you can say that about all these movies, but just seeing it done with King Kong was quite novel to me at the time, and I really love that. And then they got Terry Notary to do King Kong. Terry Notary is someone who, he's in the Planet of the Apes movies. He is the gorilla who goes bad in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Right.
And he is, I mean, he's basically studied under Andy Serkis. He's really good at the mocap thing. And he is like, just brings so much personality to Kong. I like their Kong. He's only been in 2 movies, but he has such a powerful personality to me. I really love that about him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great, and it's like one of those things that they realized, I think, that is one of the reasons why a lot of those American-made kaiju movies up till these films did not work that well, is because they avoided trying to give any character to the monsters. I mean, you know, if you want a good example of that, look at the original American version of a Godzilla, where Godzilla is like a big iguana, and that's kind of it. There's no like personality to the monster. And with all of these movies, with Godzilla, with the Godzilla movies, and with Kong, they've done a very good job of imbuing them with personality that pulls from a lot of elements from their legacy. And we'll talk about that with Godzilla versus Kong, where I think that is like really clear how they're characterizing it. But yeah, they're doing some of their own stuff, but then also pulling on the legacy for both characters to give them a lot of flavor.
Mm-hmm. And then Godzilla King of the Monsters, we had kind of a disagreement on, and you totally talked me into liking that movie on that podcast. People can go back and listen. By the end of it, I'm like, yeah, okay, I kind of liked it. Because I do think that one has a pretty problematic human side. Mm-hmm. It's like, that movie is way too long. It's like 2 hours, 20 minutes. It's got way too many human characters, many of whom are bad. Like the Bradley Whitford character is terrible. It's got way too much exposition. But holy fuck, the monster side of that movie is something else.
Yeah, this is like, I think this one is like the opposite of the Kong Skull Island thing, right? It's that like, it has like the worst stuff in any of these movies, I think, but it also has some of the best of like, when it's kicking, it kicks really fucking hard. When it is not kicking, it is just like kind of insufferable in some of those places. But there's something about that to me of where Godzilla King of the Monsters feels like it is the most like honest representation of the kaiju genre that of any of these movies. I feel like it is the most like is the one that most feels like to me that you could, if you just replaced all the American actors with Japanese people, and you know, I mean, you just say like, oh well, whatever, it's with modern CG effects instead of being suits. It's just like the plot, the pacing, the structure, like warts and all, it the most feels like you just did a 90s era Godzilla movie, with it maybe being like probably about 15 to 20 minutes longer than most of those movies were, which is probably like, that's like the most Hollywood part about it, is like the insistence that everything needs to be 2 hours or longer nowadays. But yeah, like it is, yeah, like all the stuff with the monsters in that movie, I think is just absolutely incredible. The use of the whole kind of wider breadth of monsters from, particularly they're pulling from the first half of the Showa era. So you have Godzilla, you've got Rodan, you've got Mothra and King Ghidorah, and all of them are represented so well. All of them are given really unique personalities, and they are, you know, for hardcore kaiju people like me, like they're pulling on really interesting reference points. Like I think they handle all the Mothra stuff in a very fun, subtle way, of where there are lots of elements of Mothra lore that are in there that they're pulling from the different movies that they don't draw a lot of attention to. But again, if you're a big fan of that stuff, you can see it and like me be like, oh my god, and those are the twins, and that's Infinite Island, and this is that and the other thing, and it feels like the most made for the fans ones of those movies.
I love Mothra in that movie. Godzilla is obviously a bundle of fun in that movie, and it basically, I love it ends with, you said this on the podcast at the time, the only thing missing from that movie is the big Owari at the end, yes, as Godzilla is roaring, because that's exactly the shot it ends on. The Bear McCreary score for that movie is out of this world, and it is the biggest thing I was missing from Godzilla vs. Kong. I wish they had Bear McCreary do it again and use the Ifukube stuff, because he nailed it, and I think the music for the other 3 movies is lacking to me in this series.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is the best score of these movies, and yeah, it is. With Kong versus Godzilla, I think there are elements of that score works for me, but none of the Godzilla side of that score works for me at all. It feels like Bear McCreary really understood what was effective and appealing about Ifukube's work, and like the iconic themes that he made, and like rework those into a more Hollywood kind of like audio profile or whatever.
Yes.
Whereas like the Kong versus Godzilla, they use that main Godzilla theme as like a part of Godzilla's theme in that movie, or in Godzilla versus Kong, but they don't use it well, and it just kind of gets buried in the mix. And it's like, because I watched that movie with like nice headphones on, and it's like, even with these nice headphones, like this, you're not using this theme to why it is effective at all. You should have probably just done a unique theme if you're going to use this one that poorly.
Yeah, I do not know why you do not have Bear McCreary do all of it. I mean, one, Bear McCreary just should be your first call for most like campy sci-fi fantasy stuff. And yeah, I don't know, maybe he was busy, but whatever. Anyway, the other thing is, King of the Monsters does have my favorite scene in any of these movies, which is Ken Watanabe going through like the earth to go resurrect Godzilla. Yeah. That is the best scene in any of these. It's a phenomenal sequence. It even, like, the first time I was watching the movie and I was being cynical about it, warmed my cold heart. It's such a good scene.
Yes, I love Godzilla King of the Monsters, but I think the thing I thought I said about on that podcast is like, I understand why that is, of these movies, the one that is like disliked the most. I totally get it. But fucking, it felt like they made a movie for me, and I will never not be happy that someone bothered to spend like hundreds of millions of dollars making a movie that I like. So
it feels like people are coming around on it, because the other thing is that movie just kind of bombed. It just didn't do well at the box office. It seems like Godzilla vs. Kong is doing much better. Obviously, box office is not the stat we should be using right now. But for coronavirus movies, it did well at the box office. It's clearly got a lot of... I've just seen way more talk about Godzilla vs. Kong online than I did about King of the Monsters. And then you have people who I think are going back and watching it and being... Because if you liked Godzilla vs. Kong, you will like King of the Monsters.
Yes.
I guarantee you. You might not like it as much. It's a messier movie, but you should see it. So yeah. So let's talk about it. We've delayed enough. Godzilla vs. Kong... where would you generally like place this within the 4 movies pantheon?
I mean, I think for me personally, it might be my favorite. I think it's really fucking good. I think it is the best paced out of all of them for me. I think it has it might have the best action. Like, it doesn't quite have the like I think you said this in a tweet, and I very much agree with it. It doesn't have like the majesty or like the grandeur of the 2014 movie or King of the Monsters. It doesn't have like, that shot of King Ghidorah in King of the Monsters on like the top of the fucking volcano with a cross in the foreground.
Yeah.
And that sense of like scale and like almost like sort of religious element to the imagery that they had in those two movies. It's a little bit more like Kong Skull Island of that, gets the scale well, but is not using it to represent these creatures as being godlike almost. But what it does have, I think, is just really, really smart choreography. I think it does have like really interesting, compelling camera work. In some places, it almost reminded me of the big fight in Dragon Ball Super Broly with like just like really creative, interesting like camera choices and different like shot perspectives. There's like, there's some shit of like, I love, Kong in the first fight that he has with Godzilla. He picks up a fighter jet that still has a pilot in it, throws the fighter jet at Godzilla, and then it cuts to in the fucking cockpit. Or earlier, there's a lot of good fighter jet shots because earlier there's a classic fighter jet type shot of where you have the camera mounted on the front of the jet looking back at the pilot as they take off. You've seen that shot in every fucking military movie. You've seen a Michael Bay movie. It's in like a dozen times in every Michael Bay movie ever made. Even if somehow there's not fighter jets in the movie in like Bad Boys, somehow he gets the shot in there. But it's that exact shot just in the background fucking King Kong and Godzilla are fighting, which makes that shot 1,000 times cooler than it otherwise would be. So it's like it finds ways to use really interesting and compelling cinematography to really get the scale, the personality of the monsters, and communicate the fight so well. And they think about the dynamics of the different monsters, their legacy, King Kong as being this sort of like tragic hero type character, which is where the character's roots are from the original movie. Godzilla being this like kind of enigmatic force of nature that is just utterly unstoppable. And that characterization is so compelling and used so effectively throughout the whole movie that, I'd have to think about it and rewatch Kong Skull Island and King of the Monsters, which I've only seen those movies once. But right now my gut reaction is I think this might be my favorite.
Yeah, my gut reaction is this and Skull Island are sort of on the same plane for me. And I'd have to rewatch these to say which is better, and I don't know if it even matters. I mean, my gut reaction is, holy shit, Legendary really pulled this off, because I like these 4 movies. I want to own the box set of these 4 movies and put it up on my shelf. I can't believe they did this. We'll talk about that more later, obviously, because, again, Hollywood is bad at adapting Japanese stuff. That is a truism. Yeah, so this is so much better than we deserve. But yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think, because I do think it has the best action in an action sense, right? Like, Godzilla 2014 and King of the Monsters are very poetic, and like King of the Monsters has crazy, action shit as well, but they go for like a majesty and an awe, and like a lot of it is like human scale looking up at the monsters and all of that. Very well done. They're very poetic, and I love that side of it. I think Adam Wingard who's the director of this new one, was very right to say, but that's not what you want in Godzilla vs. Kong. In Godzilla vs. Kong, you want it at the scale of the monsters, and you want their personalities and their fighting to be the thing that draws your eye. And I think it is very, very well tailored for that. And I think the action sequences are just... I can't think of the last time I would say this about a CGI-driven action sequence. They're well choreographed. Like, they feel like an actual physical fight scene between physical beings. We would talk about these the same way we would a kung fu movie almost, talking about like the choreography was really good, and they did that, and so it's all CGI. A lot of this movie you are looking at, I'm sure, 100% animation on screen. And yet it feels so physical and visceral. It is so fun. The personalities of the monsters are so good. And then on top of that, I think the biggest problem with King of the Monsters in the plot department is it's just way too convoluted. If what you really need to do is have a bunch of monsters wake up and fight each other, and they really overcomplicate that with like the monarch lore and all of this other shit that like kind of, you don't need none of it. You need some of it for all the reasons you explained earlier, Sean, but you don't need as much as they gave us. And this one is really dialed in on, the plot of this movie is actually really simple. It is that Godzilla is raging, this guy who we later learned, the Damian Bashir character, who, great use of Damian Bashir. He's very good in this. We learn later, and we already predict is like manipulating events, but he's like, there's this thing in the Hollow Earth, which is this thing we've heard about in the other 3 movies, and if you go get that, then we can defeat Godzilla. And so Alexander Skarsgård is like, okay, we'll go get that. We need Kong, so we'll go get Kong. We're on our journey to Hollow Earth. Godzilla fucks shit up a couple of times. We get to Hollow Earth. Godzilla's fucking shit up. We go up there, and then Mechagodzilla comes out, because of course it does, because that's what Damian Bashir was up to all along. That's the plot. It's like super, like, honestly, just not just for Godzilla movies, for Hollywood movies, that is very streamlined to a degree that you do not see in Hollywood scripts these days at all. I can't name the last Marvel movie that was that streamlined. I don't know if there has been one. And so it's just, you are moving, everything's moving the plot along. I think if anything, this movie is probably 10 minutes too long. I think this should have been about 100 minutes. Like in the kind of Toho Godzilla tradition, like 90 minutes with credits. And I think where I would cut is mostly on the, even though I love her in this movie, the Millie Bobby Brown side of it, it's not her, it's the other actors who do not work for me there. And that's not the actors, it's the writing. But like, other than that, it just moves like a bullet. You are into it. I remember like, you know, I was watching this movie and I was planning at some point, I knew I was going to take a break and go grab like a Diet Coke or something. And it wound up being over an hour into the movie before I remembered to hit pause and like go to the bathroom, you know, because I sat down and it was just, I was so into it, you know, and it just moves. You know, you have a big action scene 30 minutes into the movie and it's phenomenal on the boats. So yeah, it's just as a piece of Hollywood filmmaking, it's extremely solid. And I feel like the conversation on this movie is good, but I hope people don't overlook how good it gets the basics of like how to do this just because it's 2 big monsters fighting and it's kind of silly. It's a very well done movie.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with everything you said. The only notable flaw to it for me is the whole Millie Bobby Brown side of it, which like, I would like wonder if that's like almost like a contractual thing that you needed to have those characters in there, because it just doesn't feel like you could very easily cut those characters out of the movie, and outside of, you'd need to have 1 or 2 scenes to like more thoroughly establish the Mechagodzilla stuff, which is what they're kind of used for. But you could very easily cover that material in a much less kind of intrusive way. Those characters kind of feel very much shoved into the film to me. Let's talk about that for a minute here, because I don't know if you could cut it I don't know if I would go that far, because one, I like what Millie Bobby Brown is doing here. She is in full on, at this phase in her career, she is young Winona Ryder, and she knows it, and she's like, this is like Winona Ryder in Beetlejuice or something. She's very funny and wry, and like as a lead, she's a very confident lead, and I like her on that side of the movie. And obviously the goal is to have a set of human characters who are more connected to the Godzilla side of the plot. And I think if you're going to take a character from the universe they already have, it would be her, based on King of the Monsters, right? The problem to me is that she already is kind of funny in this like dry, sardonic wit sort of way. And then you have the guy played by, I'm forgetting his name, but the guy who's hosting the podcast. And he is his own sort of comic relief character, because he's very far out there in terms of his like conspiracy theory beliefs. And so, okay, you've got a comic relief character with a lead who is also kind of funny. And that is the Brian Tyree Henry character. Actor I really like. I think the writing on him is like trying too hard. But then they add in another character played by Julian Dennison, who is also an actor I really like. He's in Hunt for the Wilder People and Deadpool 2. He's very funny. His writing is terrible here, and it's like you have a third comic relief character who does nothing for the movie. And so it's a lot of characters who you don't really understand how they fit together, who are there mostly for plot reasons, but then when they're on screen, the plot reasons kind of get drowned out by the bad comedy of it, and the movie kind of cannibalizes itself a little bit there. I think if it were just Millie Bobby Brown and maybe Brian Tyree Henry in a slightly less overt comic relief mode, trying to investigate stuff and like being around, and then you'd have to come up with some way for her to have an actual interaction with Godzilla at one point, because the problem is that the humans on the Kong side know Kong like on an interpersonal friendship level, and they don't do that here. Like they don't even, I think, ever have a moment where Godzilla and Millie Bobby Brown lock eyes, which they should have done. So yeah, that's why I think it doesn't work. But yeah, here's like what I would do to kind of like shore up that side of the movie is like, one, I don't think that Godzilla needs humans in his like camp really. Like I think that's one of the smart choices of the movie is to have it be primarily from Kong's perspective. I mean, he's sort of the main character, and then Godzilla, like I said, like Godzilla oftentimes, if you're not doing super goofy like professional wrestling Godzilla, like a Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla or something, but something more in line with the Heisei movies, the Millennium Era movies, or the early Showa stuff, where he is like a force of destruction. He is incomprehensible. He is larger than life. Like you cannot, he's a giant lizard. You can't look into his eyes and understand what Godzilla is thinking in the way that you can with Kong, because Kong's an ape. You look at him, you can like see in his eyes and his facial expressions the way that Kong is feeling. That's the appeal of King Kong going all the way back to the original movie with the stop motion animation. So it's like Godzilla doesn't need humans in his camp. And I think the movie like is smart in saying, let's keep Godzilla more distant because you don't need that. Like sometimes the more attached you get to Godzilla, kind of the worse it gets. And the more sort of abstract he is almost as a creature, the more interesting he is. And to do all the Mechagodzilla stuff, which is mostly the Millie Bobby Brown side of the story, like deals with that and kind of setting up that idea. One of the other like really big loose threads to me in the movie, that's only a loose thread because I know what the shit is Shun Oguri's character as Serizawa, who is, because of his last name, that's supposed to be the son of the Watanabe Ken character from the previous movies. But that never comes up in the whole thing. There must be a deleted scene somewhere where that becomes a thing, because I would elevate his character more, make him sort of more a perspective character in Mechagodzilla, and that side of it. Flesh out that he has a grudge against Godzilla for the death of his father, and then have that be his like come to Jesus moment at the end is how they interrupt Mechagodzilla for that 1 second rather than pouring coffee on the satellite feed or whatever the fuck happens, right? Yeah. Like that whole thing just feels so messy to put 3 characters in, shove them into the scenario to do that thing, when you have this one character that's sitting there completely unused. All he's used for is the pilot of Mechagodzilla, and even then he's not actually the pilot of Mechagodzilla when Mechagodzilla is fighting. And that feels like this weird, just sort of hanging character that's there. I think like Shun Oguri has a really good presence in the couple of scenes that he's in, but he's just not a character in the movie. And I found that kind of like really odd. And it feels like there was a previous script draft or like some cut scenes or something that made that character's role feel more fleshed out or more of a character in the film.
I 100% agree. I hadn't thought of that but I found his character very striking too. So yeah, even though I think we are generally pro Millie Bobby Brown on this podcast, we will say cut that side of the movie, because this would also get my goal of getting this down to 100 minutes.
Yes.
Because you could just use the scenes that are there and beef them up a little bit. And then, yeah, I like that idea of Serizawa being our like eye onto Damien Bashir, and he like comes to realize this is bad or something, and then helps Godzilla in the end, the way his father did. That'd be really cool. Now that I say that, I'm mad that this isn't part of the movie, because Ken Watanabe is the best part of the last like 2 Godzilla movies, right?
Yeah,
he's great.
Yeah, and it was just something that as soon as like in their first scene together, the character's name is dropped as Serizawa. So I was like sitting there waiting the whole movie, because again, the Serizawa thing goes back to the original film, because that's the name of the professor that makes the oxygen destroyer that kills Godzilla in the original movie. So they borrowed that name for the Ken Watanabe character in the other 2 movies. And so it's like, as a lifetime Godzilla fan, that name, you say it and I like perk up immediately. And so I was waiting for that character to do something. And then he just like sort of disappears from the movie at some point, and was kind of bummed by that.
Yeah. But the other human side, I thought worked really well.
Yes.
You have Alexander Skarsgård as like our just, hunky male lead. You have Rebecca Hall, who she's in King of the Monsters, right?
I think she is.
I do not remember her actual role in that movie, but I remember her being in it. But the kid is new. She doesn't have the kid in the other one, right?
No.
Okay, I am actually looking this up, because now that I say it, I'm not even confident. I don't see Rebecca Hall on the cast list. I guess she's not. I thought she was a returning character, but I guess she's not.
I mean, there's so many just like random monarch scientists in King of the Monsters that you could convince me.
Yeah, okay, so she's not in those. Never mind. So she's new, but I like her. I like she's got the deaf child who signs. That character is really cool, and then Skarsgård, and you just put them all together, and it's a good group. I feel like it's well balanced for this kind of movie, and it's all about their relationship with Kong. So Kong is them, and I agree with what you said earlier that like this is really a Kong movie in the sense of like who our POV is, and it's so the right choice. And I think giving him a couple of human characters who, two of them already having a pre-existing relationship, and then Skarsgård is like our point of view entry character who gets to ask the questions. It's just they're not reforging the wheel. They're not breaking new ground, but this is how you do it. This is good stuff. This is the right way to do it.
Yeah, no, it's like really functional, good, efficient script writing, and this like that's where like the messiness on the Millie Bobby Brown thing and like how kind of excessive that side of it is almost kind of perplexing because of how smart and efficient the construction is on the Kong side, which is that thing where it's like it's that thing where when you do it really well it feels super obvious, but that's some like the hardest shit to do is like how do you like nail that down to like we get our bare essentials of what we need for our character setup on the Kong side, and like you said, doing some things like having two characters that have a pre-existing relationship with Kong even when they weren't in the Kong movie, because that movie is set like 40 years before this or whatever. Yeah, like it just sort of gets things off the ground incredibly quickly, so that way you can get into the juicy stuff without having to do 20 minutes on fake Skull Island at the beginning of the movie, like building up that character relationship, getting to know Kong. It's like, no, it's Kong. People get it. You have a couple of human characters that already like Kong and are trying to work in his best interest, and you've just cut off a potential 20 minutes of the movie you would have had to do.
I mean, literally, because this movie has like a 10-minute first act.
Yeah.
Like it is, and some movies I think that's bad when you do that because you don't establish enough. This movie though, it just gets off to the races in the best way possible, you know. And I think I do think like the best human character in this is the little girl who signs with Kong, because that is such a smart idea. One, like just I always like when you connect the giant monsters with children. They did that in King of the Monsters with Millie Bobby Brown. It's a fun thing to do, but like King Kong specifically, having him communicating in sign with the child, it just gives you this immediate like human tie to Kong because she talks his language literally. She's the one he trusts. You get to do the big size differential and have fun with that. You know, it works very well. I think that character is really cool. And then you have, Rebecca Hall is very good in this. Rebecca Hall, who is, I think, uniquely talented at doing this kind of like, it's a very straight-faced performance, but with enough of just that little twinkle of like she knows what movie she's in. Mm-hmm. It's very well. Alexander Skarsgård does it too, I think.
Yes.
They're very good at that. And then you can have the kid just be the one who is kind of in like awe and wonder of this big character. And there's some really sweet moments with that because, ultimately these are kids movies. And like, I like having that perspective on it. I want this movie to be something a 10-year-old would watch and lose their fucking mind at, right? And that's part of how you do it, is what point of view you choose to show it through.
Yeah, and I think it's smart because it's like, to me, it's like such a big part of like the King Kong identity as a character is his relationship with humans, right? And his like desire in many ways to be with humans or to like communicate with them. That is like a core theme throughout the different adaptations there have been of the original movie. And yeah, like having it be this connecting with a child this time and have it be this very kind of like pure version of it rather than it having some of like the weird uncomfortable associations that you get like racial and like sexual type stuff in the original story. Instead, like let's pare that down and create that relationship in a very kind of like simple, really clear, understandable way by having it be with a child that he has this connection with. And then that leads you to a scene early on in the movie that I think is like your big kind of knockout scene that makes you fall in love with Kong, is when he signs the word home for the first time. I think that's just like an incredible moment where you just immediately just kind of buy into the character and you realize, very clearly he has like a complex interiority that you don't have that much access to because he doesn't have complex language, but he has enough language to express this desire to go home. You're like, fuck, these people suck for taking Kong away, because Kong just wants to hang out on his island and scratch his butt and eat big monsters, and that's it. Why are you making him do all this stuff?
So let's talk about the actual stars of the movie, because they do the human side well, but I don't think it's any exaggeration to say the best fleshed out characters in the movie are Godzilla and King Kong. Mm-hmm. Like, they're the stars. completely. Their personalities are so well defined. They don't speak words in the movie. Kong a little bit through sign language, and yet I feel like more is communicated through them than through any of the humans. And it is kind of a magic trick how well it is done, you know? And even in a world where we've seen Lord of the Rings and we've seen Planet of the Apes and Peter Jackson's King Kong, where they've done all the Andy Serkis movies I just named, where you've got the great mocap performances. It just still surprises me, Sean, when you get like this movie opens with that little musical montage of King Kong scratching his butt and going around his island, and then throwing a giant spear through the like protective glass because he can, and he wants to fuck with the humans who are keeping him on his island, and that really sucks. And just immediately, he's a character. And Terry Notary does such a phenomenal job inhabiting that character and giving him a soul and a personality. And the animators do so well, bringing all that to life with like fluidity and humor. And then when you get to Godzilla, Control-C, Control-V, all the same comments. He's a less humorous character because he's Godzilla. He doesn't laugh. You know, unlike Sonic, he don't chuckle, to quote the Knuckles rap. But Godzilla has so much personality too. And when they clash, watching those personalities go against each other is so much fun. And man, you go watch an old Godzilla movie like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and I love seeing the direct tie of DNA to people in suits having fun on set figuring this out, to now, you know, millions of pixels in 4K, but it's also a guy in a suit doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's the like attention to detail and like the care for, to me, the source material of where these characters come from, and that legacy of understanding that stuff about Kong, understanding that like need to have this like direct connection with a human character, that sense of, you know, this is maybe kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but the sense like to ultimately have, you know, in the fight between Godzilla and Kong ultimately loses. And that's always been the thing to me about King Kong versus Godzilla that doesn't make sense in a modern context. Makes sense when you know it's the third Godzilla movie, so Godzilla's not like Godzilla yet. But like the roles of the characters are that Kong is tragic, right? Kong's whole story is that he's pulled from his home. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's killed by civilization. And he's this sympathetic character that at the end you're meant to care for and sympathize with Kong and see how, you know, the ways of humanity is like destroying nature, whatever kind of spins you want to take on it. But that's the core thing, is he's a tragic kind of hero character, versus Godzilla, who is unstoppable, right? Godzilla cannot be beaten. Even if you beat Godzilla, even when Godzilla dies, and Godzilla dies in a lot of those movies, he always comes back. The movie always ends with Godzilla, like a new Godzilla opening its eyes on the bottom of the ocean, or fucking a new Godzilla born in nuclear fallout, like the end of Godzilla vs. Destroya. But Godzilla is this force of unknowable destruction that walks the earth. And it's like, I think that dynamic between the two characters, where you see so much of the characterization of Kong pushing hard and like pushing past his limits, versus Godzilla like putting the foot down, quite literally, right, and saying it's like, no, like this is like our roles in this world. Like I have my eyes set on this like unknown big picture shit, and like has his, like Godzilla is doing Godzilla shit, he's going for Mechagodzilla, whatever, whereas Kong is like focused on this human drama in front of him. Like I think that dynamic is so pure and such a strong read of those characters and their legacy and what they represent, that I think it's like some of the smartest stuff in the movie is how those fights resolve in what they show about the difference between what Godzilla is and King Kong is as a character.
I agree 100%. And the thing is, I don't think I could have vocalized it the way you just did, Sean, because I have not spent the same kind of time thinking about it in my life. But I felt every word you just said watching the movie. Like, in that fight, they kind of have 3 rounds. They have the fight on the boats, King Kong loses. They have the first part in Hong Kong, where Kong sort of knocks Godzilla flat for a minute. And then you have the third and final round before Mechagodzilla shows up. And when Godzilla stomps on him and is like, stay down, I don't want to kill you. And they have one of their staring contests. And I feel like the best moments in this entire movie are when King Kong and Godzilla lock eyes and look at each other. And entire scripts worth of ideas are conveyed there because the animation and the acting is just that good. And as you say, they are playing archetypal roles we understand so well. And what is communicated to me there is this, like, Godzilla saying, like, hey, I respect you, but I have other shit to do. And King Kong kind of accepting it and going, okay, I'm not gonna beat you, but I can live with that. And, like, the way, like, that is communicated, and then you get to go into the big final fight with them sort of having come to a kind of understanding there. Again, even though they can't exchange dialogue, that's not how this works. Beautifully done. It's like, for a ostensibly very silly movie about an ape and a lizard fighting, it's very, very smart about these things.
Yeah, and it is, again, it's the efficiency of, I think, understanding that your audience, no matter who they are, even if they've literally never seen a King Kong movie or a Godzilla movie before, like, if you've lived in our culture for any meaningful period of time, you have absorbed what these characters mean in a sort of, like, totemic sense almost. Like, they are so symbolic of bigger ideas that you cannot avoid it, that it's like leveraging that as much as possible. I just think it's such incredibly smart choice. And I had a funny moment after I finished watching the movie where, because I have Gundam brain, I think of everything through a Gundam lens. And it's like, one of the things this movie does is it basically, King Kong is Amuro and Godzilla is Char, right? It's this King Kong cares about the humans that are right in front of him, even though King Kong is fighting on the side of the bad guys basically for the whole movie, right? Until the very end. He's being used by Apex to further their agenda, but you care about him because he cares about the people in front of him, even when he's fighting for the wrong side. Whereas Godzilla is fighting for a larger goal that seems unreachable, and in some ways it makes him feel almost like villainous, because he's willing to just destroy anything in the path of this bigger goal that is more important. And it's like just playing on those, like, really core archetypal ideas and communicating them entirely through a big lizard and a big monkey staring at each other and roaring at each other and then occasionally kicking the shit out of each other. Like, if that's not good filmmaking, I don't know what is. Like, that's way more impressive to me than most other movies, being able to use just, like, normal, really good actors with normal dialogue, being able to communicate that. This is so, like, purely visual and built through body language and filmmaking, to communicate what to me is, like, not the deepest message in the world, but it's like a very effective characterization and, like, very simple but effective themes throughout the movie.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Sean, this movie made me like the other three MonsterVerse movies even more, because you realize how much of a tie you have to these characters. Godzilla across 2 movies, Kong across 1, but, like, okay, they laid the groundwork for this really well, and then the people who made this movie, Adam Wingard and everyone else, just took that baton and ran with it, and really paid it off, like, to a degree where, like, we're going to talk about the possible future of this series, but if there never was another one of these, this is a great contained 4-film little fun saga, and just, yeah, understanding iconography. That is one of my favorite things. This is one of the things I like about Zack Snyder's Justice League, by the way, too. Like, just movies that, like, I feel like play with iconography in interesting ways. And this movie does it very well with icons who have this big global, power to them. It's very cool. Should we break down the individual fight scenes?
Yeah.
I kind of love that the challenge they set themselves with, that the first big fight is on boats in the ocean, a place where Godzilla has a 100% advantage and King Kong is just completely fucked, because at first King Kong is all tied down and he can't move. Then when he can move, he can't swim really, and he has to jump from boat to boat, and that's the only way he can fight this giant lizard dude. And yet they make such an exciting not yet, that's why it is so dynamic, is that you have King Kong as, like, he's Bruce Willis in that scene in Die Hard. He is, like, totally out of his element. He's just trying to fight to survive. He has no business winning this fight, and he doesn't, but it is so exciting. That scene is incredible.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those that, again, like, using Godzilla as this, like, just unstoppable force of destruction, where to me, like, the tension of that scene is like, how the fuck do they get out? Like, how do they get out of this? Like, how does Godzilla not just completely kill them? And it's that they just surrender, basically, and Godzilla's like, okay, you don't pose a threat, fine, like, you're not really what I'm interested in. I just kind of was taking care of this on the way to me doing some other shit. And then having just sort of, like, wave the white flag and saying, hey man, you win. Like, we're standing down, we're turning everything off, we're just gonna fucking sit here. I think it was like a smart way of ending that, and then having like Kong have to like fully kind of just give in and submit at the end of that sequence, which then gives Kong this like stronger motivation to then come back in the next fight to like get this rematch with Godzilla, that you have this just complete trouncing, right? He doesn't stand a chance. And some of that like choreography of Godzilla pulling Kong underwater and just like wrapping around him like a fucking serpent and just dragging him down to the bottom of the ocean before they use the depth charges to like kind of knock him free. Just some very smart usage of like, I've never seen Godzilla be so like agile underwater before, because they usually don't do underwater fights, and when they have done underwater fights, it's been big dudes in suits, right? So it's like it's been this big lumbering thing, or it's like not even really the underwater, it's like a filter on the camera. Whereas here, having this sense of, oh, he is this underwater creature that if he gets you under there, King Kong is fucked. There's absolutely nothing he can do other than just give up.
That's maybe my favorite thing about getting to do Godzilla in CGI is water stuff. Because Godzilla is aquatic. He like goes and lives, and that's always been his legacy, right? At the end of the movie, he goes off into the ocean. So like having him swim and getting to have the scales above the surface as your like sign of menace and all this stuff, you can't really do that with a suit. You have to do that with CGI, and they do it so well. And I love that. Like this is literally a fight they could never have done in suits, right?
Yeah.
And like, if you're going to do a CGI Godzilla movie, that's the kind of action sequence I want to see, you know? Something you couldn't have done in the other, how many Toho movies are there? 30-something,
yes,
you know?
It's a ridiculous number at this point.
Yeah, I want to see an action sequence you just couldn't do any other way. This is one of them. And then Kong, I just love Kong, like having to jump from ship to ship is so much fun. I love when like the entire ship is like tipping over because Kong is tied to it, and then he gets free and jumps off, and the ship like flips back around, and everyone inside is like gasping for air. He has the scene where he and Godzilla are on the big aircraft carrier, and he gets his one big punch in on Godzilla, which is an amazing shot. And then Godzilla goes down and just decides, I'm going to just blow this motherfucker up with my atomic breath. And then Kong jumps away exactly like Bruce Willis in Die Hard from the explosion. It is such a good shot. I love that he is just an 80s action hero in this. It's so good.
Yes, yeah, the shot of Kong jumping off the boat as it explodes behind him with a giant blue fucking laser shooting up into the sky. That is an amazing shot. I also love the like Kong, after the fight is over, Kong dragging himself back onto the air carrier, and it's the classic like hero has almost drowned and like coughs up water out of his lungs, but it's fucking King Kong, so he like coughs up 5 swimming pools worth of water onto the deck of this air carrier. It's like it's just a thing I've never seen in one of these other movies. Is like them being able to characterize him as this like 80s action hero because he's an ape, so he has like all these humanistic qualities to him that you can kind of play with that more, but it's just like made ridiculous by the scale and some him coughing up fucking like a lake basically. I love that moment.
Oh, it's so good. Okay, then you get all the Hollow Earth stuff, and I love that side of the movie. I love that whole idea that like all these monsters are like, I don't need an explanation of where all the monsters come from, but if you're gonna do it, I think this is a cool one where it's like there's this other like dimension almost in the middle of the earth, and the way they explore it here with like there's the gravity switch, and so you have to have these special like ships, but the monsters can just do it themselves. But then you go through the tunnel and it's like 2001, but like as a Mystery Science Theater movie. It's just so crazy. And then they get through there, and you have this big infinite, basically Skull Island, but as an entire world. It's such a cool idea. It's one of my favorite parts. So just the sheer imagination of it is one thing that separates this from most other modern Hollywood movies, I think. And that they give, and then, you know, this is where Kong goes back to at the end of the movie. That's something I really love, is the idea of Kong actually getting a home. This is the movie where Kong gets a happy ending. Yes. Like, Kong is a tragic character, but for this movie, he not only gets a home, he gets his real home back, and he gets to go there. And if I have one disappointment with this movie, beyond some of the like Millie Bobby Brown side of the movie, I wish he actually did see his family somewhere in there. I wish we got some intimation of there being other giant apes, because that would also just set up a cool sequel at some point. Godzilla's versus Kongs. I want that. Yeah, so, but that whole side of it, Sean, it's so fucking cool.
Yeah, no, it's because the Hollow Earth thing has been a thing in like the background of these movies like the whole time. It's been a concept, I think, going back to the fucking 2014 one. They at least like say that idea. And so it's been the thing they've said a lot. But yeah, actually seeing it and the like, because it's this like world at the heart of the Earth or whatever, but because it's inside the Earth, you have it like wraps around, so you see mountains like coming down from the sky basically, and that's where you just get a full-on like fucking heavy metal album cover of this like floating stone castle that's at the middle of the Earth, that's at like must be at the exact middle of the Earth because it's where gravity is zero, right? So it's being pulled at the same amount in every other direction by the rest of the Earth around it, so it's just floating, and Kong fucking seeing all these rocks there, and he pokes it, and then he jumps up and is like lifted up by the zero gravity and just carried up into this giant, again, this castle made of stone and bones, because it's also, he grabs onto a like giant like petrified ape hand that's reaching out from it, opens like these massive Kong-sized doors, sits down on a giant stone throne with an axe made from the spines of a dead Godzilla, and he sits there like fucking Conan the Barbarian at the end of Conan. It's just like, that is the coolest thing I've maybe ever seen in a movie. Like, it is just the most, we're just going for it. We don't give a fuck. It's the most fucking metal thing ever. And then having him put the axe in like this Godzilla skeleton that's buried down in a circle around the throne, and it charging with like the radioactive Godzilla energy or whatever. It's like, who the fuck came up with that? Like, that is the coolest shit I have ever seen. It's so ridiculous, but so perfect. And it has that like Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal that just like, we're just going for it 100%. We're taking like our inspirations from this like goofy shit and taking it 100% seriously, and just rolling with it. And it has that same kind of aesthetic to it, or that I'd like energy to it, that the modern Doom games have, in a way I really appreciated.
I really like the Doom connection there. Absolutely. Can you imagine, Sean, going back and telling like your younger self in 2014 that like this new Godzilla movie Hollywood's making is eventually going to lead to King Kong sitting on a throne in an anti-grav chamber at the middle of the Earth with a axe made out of a Godzilla spine? Like, it's so cool. I really can't understand how these movies got made, especially this one, in a Hollywood that like is so careful and like not adventurous and homogenized. Like, these are like nutso even by the Toho standards, Like, we are in like Final Wars territory in parts of this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is pulling on like some of like the most absurdist elements of those old movies as like inspiration. And yeah, it's like, and it's true across all four of these movies. Like, one thing I love about this, the MonsterVerse or whatever, is how representative it is of like the scope of what the genre can be, and like pulling on these influences, and it's like all these movies are clearly made by directors and people who like really care about and understand the genre and are doing right by it in a way that is like, just seems impossible. Like, it's a thing that Hollywood tries all the time, like particularly with like Japanese source material, like the modern Ghost in the Shell and all that shit. But like anything, right? It's like the same problem they have with like making video game movies. They just can't do it. They just can't figure it out because they don't like give themselves to it fully. And all
what they're always trying to do is fit a square peg in a round hole.
Yes.
They're trying to take the shape of this thing and fit it into the cookie cutter shape of a Hollywood movie as they understand it, in like the Mad Lib sense of just replace all the nouns. And you can't do that. And these movies do not feel like they're trying to box themselves into those holes at all.
Yeah. They just are so earnestly what they want to be, again, with this sense of like deep love and affection for what they are in the genre and the history and the characters and all of that. And yes, and then you get stuff that, like you said, like this is a sequence that you could do elements of this with the classic style effects, but you would never be able to really get like what they get across here that way. And yeah, just the sense of otherworldliness, and of truly like in those moments you're just watching a gorgeous animated movie. And I'm totally down for that. Like, I like animation, obviously. So it's like, if you want to give me this like super realistic hardcore CG anime movie that is what I'm watching right now, like fucking go for it. Because you just get a lot of good moments there as well with what I think are like ironically the most successful new monster designs they have done are the two monsters that they fight like very shortly in here, where they have this big flying serpent thing that is bright and colorful and like red and green, and Godzilla fucking rips its head off and eats its neck and shit. And then you have
drinking like the blood out. It's really great.
Yeah, that's really great. And then the monsters at the end that are like these weird like vulture bats, that I think are also, that's a great design, because it gets with those that like one of the core things I think you need to do with a kaiju is you need to pull on things that people understand and kind of ground the design. Because if you look at all the Toho monsters, they're all based on dinosaurs, or they're based on like mythological creatures like dragons, or like King Kong, it's just a giant gorilla. Stuff like that where you can ground it enough and usually exaggerate one or two elements of it that the audience understands what they're looking at, rather than the kind of amorphous gray, it's sort of like an insect but also like a lizard, but it's got this like mammalian quality too, thing that all the like the Mutos and Cloverfield and all that just are so undefined. Having here's a big flying serpent and here's like a cross between a bat and a vulture, that's something that an audience can look at and immediately like identify and associate things with those visual designs. And it's weird to me that this is like where you get that in these movies is in like two smaller moments here. But I very appreciated that they kind of felt like they went out of their way to make two interesting designs to use for those short scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, the Hollow Earth stuff might be my favorite stuff in this movie in its own way, because it is just so out there and it is so imaginative, and it's almost, it's not an afterthought in this movie, but it's not the main event, you know? It is the middle section of this movie. It's not even the biggest thing they had to do, and yet so much love goes into it. But then you have the entire finale in Hong Kong, and, you know, Hong Kong, in the real world, it's in a lot of political turmoil right now. You know, mainland China making a lot of intrusions. Luckily, in the world of Godzilla vs. Kong, Hong Kong doesn't have to worry about any of that because it is utterly destroyed by the end of this movie. They do not have to worry anymore because they have nothing to worry about. They're gone.
It is one of the best fights in any kaiju movie, Jonathan. Like, it is the fight between Godzilla and Kong in Hong Kong. It's so good. Like, it's just... They use every element of both Godzilla and King Kong to such great effect. They use the lizard element of Godzilla. He uses his tails, he uses his claws, he uses his like mouth to bite, and they design around that really well. And versus King Kong using his like agility to jump from building to building, and he's got a fucking axe that he's using to block Godzilla's fucking atomic breath. Like, it's just such a creative, smart, interesting sequence that's so well shot, so well choreographed. It has so many little moments built throughout for pacing and for clarity. It is just, I think, like a hugely impressive piece of filmmaking. And from like every single department going into making that sequence work, it's just fucking incredible.
It's so good. I don't even know where to start with it. Because now I'm thinking about like all the other beats, because there's this and then there's all the stuff with Mechagodzilla at the end, which is also just out of this world. But yeah, I love that so many buildings fall down. I know that sounds like dumb and childish, but one of the things I love is the possibilities of these is like just decimate a fucking city for me. And it's just like there's just no care put into it. Kong and Godzilla are there, they are fighting, and they do like their little nominal like people are evacuated, so you don't have to feel too bad about it. And then it's just, they are just running through buildings together. They are falling on them. Like Kong will like push Godzilla, and Godzilla will hit a building and it'll just collapse. And you know, they're just so, it's like that level of destruction that like you kind of imagine when you're watching an older Godzilla movie, because they can't actually destroy 70 buildings. They can do like one or two on their set. And you just get to see, it's like what was in your imagination, you know, as a kid. And it is so brought to life, and it is so good. I love that King Kong has the axe. I love all of it. I love there's the moment where Godzilla is using his atomic breath, and Kong tries to do the King Kong thing of pulling his jaw apart, but he's doing it with Godzilla, so that really doesn't work. Yeah. Godzilla isn't having any of that. But I just love the idea of having King Kong and Godzilla on screen, and King Kong tries to do the thing he does not work.
Yes, it wasn't a great idea. Yeah, it's just, my jaw was just fucking agape basically for the whole thing. Yes. It is, because as you say, it uses the scale of what you're seeing with like the buildings and the monsters so well that every step, every attack, every dodge, everything they do comes with it the repercussions of destroying everything around them. Like every time King Kong jumps like up and kicks off of a building, that building fucking collapses and goes flying. The sense of weight and momentum and just sheer power between these two creatures is so well communicated, with, again, just very creative choreography that uses those sort of ability sets to their utmost. Like, I would love to know how long they spent kind of choreographing the fight and coming up with all the beats, because it just feels like there is so much thought and care that went into it that it must have been very difficult, because you're not trying to choreograph something that is two martial arts fighting where you can just get two professional martial artists and your stunt coordinator and give them a couple of weeks and they can like work out some moves and kind of improvise some stuff. It's like you have to really sit down and draft out and think through every single beat, because it's two things that don't exist, that can't exist, trying to fight each other. And just having the amount of creativity that goes into how these two creatures would fight each other, I'm just like so impressed by.
One of my favorite shots in the entire movie is in here when the gang of humans, Alexander Skarsgård and Rebecca Hall, come up from the Hollow Earth in their ship, and they do it like, I mean, specifically Adam Wingard has called this out. He said he was inspired by the Back to the Future ride at Universal. And if you've been on, it doesn't exist anymore, sadly, but if you've been on the Back to the Future ride at Universal, there's this part where you are in the DeLorean flying through like ancient Earth, and you go like, there's a T-Rex and you like go through its mouth and all this stuff, and it's amazing. And they basically just do that because the ship comes out, and in the ship's POV they fly like through King Kong's mouth and around Godzilla, and just all from the scale of that ship all around it. And it's just one of those moments that's like, how did they pull that off? The scale of that, the sense of actual like camera fluidity, even on my, my TV's not little, but like little compared to a theater screen, right? I still felt like I was moving in the seat. Oh man, I want the ride version of this. I want this at Universal Studios, and go on a ride that they just use the footage from this fucking movie. It'd be great.
Yeah. No, it is just utterly spectacular. Like, one of my favorite sequences is, I think this is out after Godzilla's knocked out for the first time, but where Godzilla's just like crawling on all fours low to the ground, snapping at Kong's feet, which is another thing that's like, I've never seen Godzilla do that before, right? Because I mean, that's one thing that Godzilla can't do that in the suit, because it would kill the person inside of it, right? Like, you'd be crushed. And his legs don't bend that way. So like being able to use like a fucking crocodile or some shit, like using those elements again, it's just, I just want to watch it again right now. It's basically as we're talking about it.
And then we get Mechagodzilla. So Sean, what did you think about how they did Mechagodzilla in this world? Because one of the cool things that struck me is it doesn't seem that indebted to any other version of Mechagodzilla, at least visually.
It's quite unique, yeah. Its design, like I wish it was a little bit. Like, I wish there were two versions of Mechagodzilla, because I like the, like, kind of fucked up, kind of these, like, you see, like, cables and things exposed. Like, I like that look, but I was kind of hoping that then the final version of him would be kind of more put together and look a little bit more like, it wouldn't, like, look like classic Mechagodzilla, but the Mechagodzillas from the Millennium Era movies, where he looks more like a metal Godzilla rather than the, like, weird thing that they did with Mechagodzilla in the original design. But other than that, like, I like the creativity in terms of it really feels like they approached it with a like mecha angle of, he's got rocket boosters that he uses to emphasize punches and stuff like that. He's like very mobile. His like body moves in ways that an actual animal body would not be able to move. And so there's kind of the same attitude taken to Mechagodzilla as Godzilla and Kong, of what are things that this can do. And let's like explore that to its fullest possibility, even if it's not real, or like realistic, because none of this shit is realistic. Like, let's just like push it all the way. And yeah, the sense of like the Terminator quality to him, right? That it's just this like unfeeling, unstoppable robot that is just kicking the shit out of Godzilla is very effective and like super smartly put together. Yeah, I just thought, anytime Mechagodzilla shows up, I'm going to be very happy. I think it's interesting, the concept of it, which feels slightly borrowed from Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, where in that movie, Mechagodzilla is made out of the skeleton of the Godzilla from the original 1954. it feels like they take a similar idea here, but use King Ghidorah's skull, and use that as like the base for the monster. And I think that that's a cool way to sort of, one, explain how Godzilla knows and can kind of sense that Mechagodzilla is out there, explain why it's evil, and then also tying in all the weird telepathic stuff. There's one line a character has I love. I think it's the conspiracy theory dude, where he's saying like, oh, like the reason why you have all this telepathy stuff is King Ghidorah has 3 heads, but because it's so big, it would take so long for an electric signal to go from one head to another that it just communicates telepathically. And like, that is such a cool fucking like bullshit plot reason to make it so that like you can control Mechagodzilla, like, because it makes sense on like its own crazy level. Like all that stuff, I just think it's a very cool, unique version of the creature.
Totally agree. I agree that I could maybe go for a slightly more finished version of Mechagodzilla here, but I love what they have. I love that it does look like a mech. Like, it looks like an actual, like, it's the only Mechagodzilla that looks like, Amuro would get in it and pilot it,
yes.
Like, and it feels like they tried to build a robot that looked like Godzilla. So it's got the spines and all of that, but it's a very robotic version of it. And it's got the Terminator eyes, and it's just all gnarly. And I think I kind of like the bravery of just like going, Mechagodzilla is a great idea, but let's do a totally different thing with it. And I think that's really cool. My favorite shot in the entire movie involves Mechagodzilla, and it is during the Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla fight, where you have the shot, we're in a high-rise tower, and the shot is within a boardroom in an office building. And Mechagodzilla grabs Godzilla, smashes him through one building, smashes him through another building, and then smashes him to the camera through like all the glass that we're looking through. Yeah. And it's like Matt Zoller cites in his review on RogerEbert.com, compared it to the moment in Police Story when Jackie Chan's face goes through the glass. That's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. It's Godzilla doing a Jackie Chan stunt where he gets his fucking head pushed through glass. It's the most, it's very appropriately, it's a very Hong Kong movie thing to do in Hong Kong, but instead of on the scale of, how Jackie Chan did that is he placed the camera behind the glass, we do the same thing, but now the glass is an entire side of a building, and the camera has to be inside the boardroom in that building for that shot to work. That, to me, is the best shot in the entire movie. I fucking adore it.
Yeah, no, yes, that one's very good. And there's just, like, lots of shots like that. It's just, like, it feels like, again, every single person was trying to say, like, what is the most interesting way we can do this? Like, let's really kind of think outside the box, not just do, here's, like, some big wide shots from, like, a helicopter type perspective. Here's some shots near the ground for, like, scale, and just kind of do it that way. Instead, let's really put the camera in weird places and do weird things with it, while never sacrificing the clarity of what's happening. Like, it's always really clear what the monsters are doing, why they're doing it, and like the spacing of everything, but they're also finding really interesting ways to represent that.
I love that the end of the fight is the most like 1980s buddy cop lethal weapon style thing, where the big heavy who's Godzilla, he's fought too much, he's down on the ground, he can't get up. King Kong comes in, he's the plucky one with like the last bit of strength, and Godzilla can't get up and help him fight, but what Godzilla can do is from the ground. It's basically the equivalent of like the partner on the ground throwing a gun to the other partner who's on his legs, but instead it's Godzilla breathing his atomic breath onto the axe, Godzilla having his superpowered axe, and then just cutting Mechagodzilla up, and oil goes everywhere. If that were an actual creature and that were blood, this movie would be rated NC-17, because it's just buckets of blood hitting the camera, but it's oil, so it's okay. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah.
Yes, yeah, no, fucking Kong going full Samurai Jack on Mechagodzilla and just ripping it to pieces covered in oil. Yeah, it's one of those of where, like, it's just the most effective, coolest, like, Chekhov's gun style setups in any fucking movie ever, is setting up the idea that the axe is powered up by Godzilla's radioactive breath, which means that, like, because that was like, as soon as I saw that and knew Mechagodzilla's coming, it's like, well, of course this movie's going to end with them fighting together. Well, how do they fight together? Like, he's got to get the axe charged. Godzilla's the one who can charge the axe. Like, it's such a clean, well communicated idea, that then is like, it's very satisfying because it gives Kong his moment of victory at the end, right? That Godzilla, in the Godzilla-Kong fight, Godzilla wins, but Kong gets to come back at the end and defeat Mechagodzilla, so he gets his own victory as well. So it's just a very satisfying conclusion for all parties.
And of course, like any Mechagodzilla movie, it has to end with him ripping off Mechagodzilla's head and holding it aloft, because that's how this works. Yes. And it's great. And then I love, like, Godzilla gets up and, like, dusts himself off and leaves. I don't know how else to describe this other than the look Godzilla turns back and gives that last look to King Kong. It reminds me of Keanu Reeves in John Wick, where, like, John Wick will have a big fight and he'll do the, like, dust off and, like, get himself and kind of look back and, like, do the little nod and then walk off, because John Wick is such a non-verbal character. Godzilla might as well be John Wick in this movie. And I love that I got to just say that sentence out loud.
Yeah.
This is great.
No, you're 100% right. That's like, yes, that last look he gives, and then he lumbers off into the ocean, and it's like, no, it's like, hey, we cool, like, let's go.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's an incredibly satisfying conclusion.
I really want another one where they get to team up again, and, like, they're the kinds of characters, they're never going to be friends, but they do have this, like, very clear begrudging respect for each other by the end of this, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, speaking of which, where would you, if they do more of this, because I feel like Legendary has been keeping their powder dry a little bit, because they announced basically this entire cycle after the Gareth Edwards movie was a success, and they announced they're going to do a Kong movie, a Godzilla sequel, and then a team-up movie, and they had it all planned out. Very Marvel-like. Like, this is the only, like, so many studios have tried to ape the Marvel thing. DC tried to do it, Universal tried it with their Dark Universe, but Legendary's the only one that did it right, which is they started with one movie, people liked it, and then they made more, and they gradually built up to the big event. Clearly, this movie is a success. It's getting a ton of chatter. Legendary has definitely recouped their investment based on, like, the deal they had to make with Warner to get this on HBO Max. So I feel like they probably will do more. As the Kaiju fan, what would you want to see from more of this? They've definitely hit all the basic bases, it feels like. So where do they go next?
That's a really good question, because I was thinking about that after I watched the movie as well. Because I think it's hard to know, like, because they did, as you say, they kind of covered their major bases. Like, they did their Godzilla introduction, which is sort of fairly light on the Godzilla fighting other monsters thing. Like, it has that, but it's more about, like, here's how fucking cool Godzilla is and destroying cities and that kind of stuff. Then you do your big Godzilla monster team up. You also have your Kong movie that kind of establishes this version of Kong. And then you have your Godzilla and Kong together. And with King of the Monsters, they hit so much, since they hit Rodan, they hit Mothra, and they fully did King Ghidorah stuff. Like, they hit some, like, the really big heavy hitters, and they used Mechagodzilla here. So in terms of, if you want to make more Godzilla movies and you wanted to use existing monsters, like, there's a couple of kind of notable ones you could do. You could pull Gigan, which would be fucking crazy. Gigan's the one with the, like, chainsaw on its chest and, like, the big red eye. You could do something like, I think it would be interesting to try to tackle Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, because that movie's fucking crazy and the Smog Monster is just such a unique, weird one. I think you could do some interesting stuff if you wanted to redo that. Godzilla versus Destroya, which is one of the better Heisei era ones. Destroya is a great monster design that was only ever used once, and I would love to just have that design used again, because I think in particular with this style, it would look good, because Destroya is, like, giant, like, it's bigger than Godzilla. It's super powerful. It's a really good design and a good creature. But I think I would also, like, if they fucking committed to it and did it well, like, I would like to see a new monster. I'd like to see a new kaiju design that wasn't shit. So getting, like, committing to, let's try to make an interesting monster for Godzilla to fight or Kong to fight, or both of them to fight, like, and coming up with something new. I would love to see them try to do it, because I think they've, with these movies, at least proved that they, like, get what the genre is. They have people that understand what they're doing. They've got a commitment to seeing it through. And I think it would be fun to see it, instead of trying to revisit major elements and beats from classic monster movies, to try to do something new, because they've hit, as you said, all the major stuff. Additionally, I think it would also be very cool for them to do a Mothra movie, and just, like, full on, like, not even Godzilla in it, just full on a Mothra movie. Maybe Mothra fights another monster, or it's just about Mothra, because Mothra has had multiple different solo movies that have all been quite interesting and pretty good. And I think it would be interesting to get a different director and, like, go a very different take on one of these movies, but use Mothra. I think that would also be really cool.
Mothra is so fucking cool in King of the Monsters. I would be down for that. I feel like the most obvious path is frankly just like a straight up sequel to this movie, and have another Godzilla Kong team up, because you could invent you could do all the monsters you listed, you could come up with a new one. There's lots you could do there. I think the Hollow Earth stuff is something worth exploring. Like, I could see another Kong solo movie being about that could be really cool. Yeah. Like, Kong is clearly the character here with the most legs. Like, Godzilla, you've got to be a little careful with because of how they've characterized him. You can't do a ton of these, I feel like, or else they're going to wear him out, because there's some element of mystery to him. But Kong, you could do lots of fun stuff, and I think a nominal Kong Skull Island sequel, but Skull Island is just the Hollow Earth this time. There's some fun stuff you could do there. But I would like to see them continue this in some form. It doesn't need to be right away. It doesn't need to be exactly on the level they've been doing. But man, it's so much fun. I do wonder if, like, without the like size of the title Godzilla versus Kong, if they can make another one of these that will like really get public attention. Like, I would love to see the Mothra movie too. I have a little bit of I worry that any studio would like sign off on that, but maybe Legendary doesn't need anyone else to sign off on that.
Yeah, I mean, in my head, when I say Mothra movie, like, it would not be as expensive or like extravagant as these. Like, obviously, you'd still be relatively effects heavy because you would have to have Mothra in it. But like, Mothra is not really about fighting. It's like slightly more conceptual. It's about more people's like relationship with Mothra, and like you could do interesting things with Infinite Island, which is where Mothra's fun and and play with like the lore. And traditionally, Mothra's like associated with like environmentalist type themes. That is also a thing that's like kind of been in the background of most of these movies. And I think you could do something, if you got an interesting filmmaker that had a good idea, I think you could do a really cool movie that wouldn't have to be anywhere near as expensive as these ones, because it would be more human focused and less monster heavy.
And the other thing about the future of these movies is they're not fully reliant on the American market. Like, these are Japanese co-productions. Toho is involved in these movies. There are people from Toho who are like, this is not just Americans fucking off doing their own thing. That's very important to know about these films. They've done well in Japan, to my knowledge. I don't know about this one yet. So like, and I think they've done well in China. So like, there is room here to grow and experiment. Maybe even use leads from other countries too. I'd be okay with that. It doesn't even necessarily have to be in English. We'll see what happens. Like, if anything, like, what if Legendary and Toho just full on collaborated on the next Japanese one? I think that's possible based on what we've heard. I'd be curious. Like, these, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, but it seems like these two Godzilla fans, not just you, but fans, stand much more alongside the Toho movies than we ever would have expected.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like, it is, like, and it's something that I, like, actually enjoy, that they have so much of the Toho, like, style to them, and, like, I think that, like, that care for it, while still having a, like, enough of a Hollywood sensibility that it, like, separates it, right? Like, it's not exactly like those movies. They're still American productions, but instead of the American element of it feeling like it's sort of destroying the roots of the Toho Kaiju stuff, it feels like it's giving it its own spin. So yeah, like, my impression is that, as far as I can see, like, most people who are fans of the genre, like, going back to its roots in the original Japanese movies and stuff like that, really enjoy these movies because they are solid representations, and again, like, 4 very different kinds of representations of what these movies are like, and all of them are very good in their own right.
Awesome. Well, anything else to say about Godzilla versus Kong before we wrap up for today?
This movie just fucking rules, man. It's just, like I said, like, I don't know how you could watch this movie and not come away just with a giant smile on your face. And unless someone forced you into it and you're not into these movies at all. But if you see the title Godzilla versus Kong and you watch this movie, like, it should bring you intense joy, like it brought me, because it is such an incredible execution of that premise, so far above and beyond what I ever would have expected, what I did expect for this movie, because I didn't necessarily, based on the trailers and stuff, think this movie was going to be amazing. I was excited to see it, but it, like, 100% blew my expectations out of the water.
It is the easiest movie to recommend ever, because all you have to say is, does the title sound fun to you? you will like this movie. I don't know another movie where you can really do that just based on the title, you know? I guess other Godzilla versus movies, but that's part of a series. You know what it is. Yeah, it's great. And honestly, Sean, the more we've talked about it here, I'm more leaning towards this is my favorite of the Legendary movies. I want to rewatch them all. I hope they do a 4K box set because I will buy that day one of these 4 movies. I would love to own these all. So, yeah. But hey, Godzilla, it's good.
You were right. He's like Godzilla.